Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the third part of What If Deku Was Part of Us experiment. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Mina Ashido let out a small groan of pain as she slid into her desk the next day, her backpack falling to her side as she almost slid off her seat. For a moment, she just stared at the ceiling as her sore muscles began to loosen a little as they were thankful for the sudden relaxation. It wasn't until she heard the familiar sound of a foot being dragged across the floor that she turned her head. As she thought, it was Uraraka still limping as she got into her own seat before face planting onto her own desk. Yet, despite all the pain she was clearly in, the Gravity Girl had a smile on her face, one that Mina herself understood and mirrored. Last night had been intense. When the two girls had first arrived in the gym being used by the 1B training group, the pair had been met with suspicion as well as looks of pure disdain. It was clear that they all knew who they were, which class they belonged to. As such, their expression clearly stated that they did not belong there. "Alright everyone, listen up," Izuku had said after clapping to get everyone's attention. "We have a couple new people who wish to join our training sessions." "Whoa, hold on there," came a gruff voice from the crowd. "Why the F should we let them join us? Didn't we start this group so we could be prepared for the sports festival and beat the ever-loving shit out of their class? What the F, man? What the literal F?" "While I disagree with Oasis' crude language, I share his feelings on the matter," said a girl near the front with vines for hair. As the girl spoke, Mina could see several other people nodding in agreement while keeping their narrowed eyes on the pair. Seeing this solidarity of their feelings caused a pit to form in the acid girl's stomach as she understood just how much one was hated by the school. Glancing to her side, Mina could see Uraraka holding her hands together across her chest while her body trembled. It seemed that she was feeling the same thing as well. Yet there was a look of determination in her eyes, a fierce refusal to back down now, one that Mina shared wholeheartedly. The pink-skinned girl looked away from her classmate to scan the group before her once more until her eyes fell upon one. A blue-haired girl who was half hiding behind another student, this one a boy with untamed purple hair and looking like he hadn't slept in a while. But despite her attempts, it was hard to hide when those snake-like bodies coming out of your back made you stick out like a sore thumb. Their eyes met, the blue-haired girl flinching slightly as she tried her best to hide behind the boy even more while the serpent heads hissed at the acid teen. So, as Midoriya did his best to calm everyone down with his hands, Mina began walking towards the other girl. With each step she took, she could feel everyone's stares upon her. Their glares sharpened, making Mina's heart pound all the more loudly. But that never stopped her from moving one foot in front of the other until she was finally in front of the pair. The tired-looking teen who kind of reminded her of Mr. Aizawa raised a hand as if to shield his friend from an attack. Then, Mina bowed deeply. "I am so sorry for what happened to you today," Mina had said, a pain entering her voice. I should have been there to stop Minta. I should have insisted that us girls not eat outside so we could keep an eye on the little creep. Because I did nothing, he just did whatever he wanted. It could have been prevented. I'm just so sorry for what those bullies did to you." Mina never raised her head once, keeping it down as tears formed in her eyes. She almost felt like she had been the one having her ass smacked by that little pervert. "You think saying sorry is good enough? Our sister was humiliated in front of the entire school. How do you plan on making up for this? Do you taste like bubblegum?" Mina winced a little at the three female voices coming in front of her, as well as feeling a little confused by the fourth. But still she kept her head down. "Sisters, that's enough," came another voice, one much softer and sweeter than the first four. The gym had gone silent for a moment save for the sounds of someone moving forward on the mat. Then, the voice spoke again. "Could you please raise your head?" Mina hesitated for only a breath, but did as she was asked. Though she was still bowing, she lifted her head up to see that the business course student was looking at her. While the serpents on her back were still shooting her angry looks, the girl's eyes were no longer looking at her with fear. Instead, Mina saw that they had become gentle as they looked into her own teary eyes while a kind smile appeared on her lips. "Even though you did nothing wrong, thank you," was all the girl said after that, bowing in return as she spoke. The apology had been accepted. As the two girls righted themselves, Mina noticed that the tension in the room had lessened. Sure, there were still students in the room giving her looks that were certainly not friendly, but the overall hostility had gone down sharply. No one looked like they would pounce on her, ready to rip her to shreds or anything like that. So, after seeing this, Mina had taken a deep breath before stepping back to address the rest of the students. "Listen, I know our classes haven't been on the best of terms," she began, "and that is mostly our fault. We should have done more to stop Monoma from mocking you. We should have tried telling Bakugo to stop calling you extras, though he does that to everyone including us. But, more importantly, I should have done more to show that I want to be friends with all of you. So, I understand what you're all thinking right now. Me coming here, saying all this because I want something from you. I get it. That's why, if you don't want me here, I'll leave without making a fuss. But just think a little longer about my friend. She has a better reason than I do for wanting to do well in the sports festival. Uraraka needs it so much more." Well, someone said in the back before a small murmur began to grow. From where she stood, Mina had seen several of them shifting uncomfortably where they stood. Then Midoriya spoke, his voice carrying over everyone else's. "You're here now, and that's what matters," Midoriya had said, a brilliant smile on his face as he had stepped forward. "Listen, I know a lot of you still have negative feelings about 1A, and that's fine, you're allowed to. But, even when they knew this, both girls still came to us for help. And helping others when they need it is still a core aspect of what it means to be a hero, regardless of how they personally feel about them. I've said it before, we are meant to lift others up. So, let's show them our class spirit, our pride and dedication to being the best heroes we can possibly be." Hell yeah. Mina recalled how she turned her head before blinking in surprise at who had yelled that. It looked like someone had brought one of those old comic panels and made a yoon out of it. However, it had taken Mina a moment to realize that it wasn't a yoon but someone's head. "But they're not from our class," someone had said, albeit in a weaker tone. "True, but we also have people here from General Studies and the business course," a new girl had said as she walked next to Midoriya. It had taken Mina a moment to recall her name, something Kendo. "The class rep of 1B, I agree with what Midoriya here is saying. I doubt everyone in that class is a jerk. So let's give these two the benefit of the doubt. If they need help, and no one in their class is willing to help them, then we'll do what's right." "Well, if that's the case," came the voice of one of 1B's female classmates. Mina's eyes then widened as various masses of flesh began flying through the air, including a human head of a green-haired girl. Surprised, all Mina could have done was stand there with her eyes wide as these masses dashed towards her with the floating head showing off a fanged grin. Thankfully, those pieces passed right by her. No, rather they rushed right past her to get to their real target, Uraraka. Mina remembered how her heart had pounded in her chest as she turned her body, finding that the green-haired girl was reassembling herself behind the shaking gravity girl. The splitting girl's head seemed to rest on Uraraka's shoulder, her grin sending chills down Mina's spine. "I think setting some ground rules would be a good idea," the girl had said, her hands resting on Uraraka's shoulders. "Like no telling your classmates what our quirks are. Oh, and don't tell them every little thing we are doing. You can tell them that you are training with us, just don't get into specifics and ouch." The girl was interrupted by Kendo, who had moved behind her classmate to karate chop the girl's head with an enlarged fist. Turning around, the green-haired girl gave her class rep a look of surprised anger while Kendo just gave her a deadpan look. "Hey Kendo, what's the big idea? You didn't have to scare them with your antics, Takage," Kendo had said with a sigh. She then turned to Uraraka and Mina. "Sorry about that, but Takage does bring up a good point. We don't want the rest of your class to find out about our quirks. I'm sure the same goes for you. So, let's make this fair. We won't ask about your class quirks and you keep ours a secret. Sound good?" "Why yes," Uraraka had agreed. Mina echoed the promise instantly. Then, she noticed that Takage was giving Uraraka a once-over. Starting from her feet and going all the way up to the permanent blush on her face, the green-haired girl seemed to study her features until a light blush appeared on her face. Then, before Mina could put anything together, Takage looked away while scratching the side of her face. "Well, I guess we'll be training together," she had said. "Oh, listen, I don't mean this in a perverted way but if you're at all bi-curious, give me a ring." Uraraka's face went hot red, steam coming out of her ears as she looked at Takage. "Well, it's better than what Mineta usually tries with us," Mina had said, her shoulders slumping slightly as a small smile made its way to her face. From there, training began in earnest with Midoriya taking the lead in their training. The first thing he wanted to know was what their quirks were, stating that once he knew what they were he could come up with something suited for them. Uraraka had gone first, telling him that she could remove the effects of gravity on anything she touched with the pads on her fingers. This had brought out a hum from the green-haired boy before looking up. "I think your best option is to learn a little judo," he had said. "One of the basic elements of judo is grappling their arms before tossing them. Adding your quirk into the mix, you have the potential to throw them farther than any normal person without a strength-enhancing quick is able to. Or you can toss them into the air then, once they're high enough, you can release your quirk, basically allowing gravity to take back control in order to deal a significant amount of damage to the villain. Now, this won't work against everyone, especially those who know mid-air mobility. But it's something simple that I can teach you in a week. Another possibility is to learn the German suplex. It's not something that I'm personally fond of, but removing the weight of your opponent might make this a more powerful move for you." Mina remembered barely having to glance at Uraraka to see that she was perfectly okay with this. Stars seemed to sparkle in her eyes, almost bouncing from side to side ready to try this. So, for the next 10 or so minutes, Mina watched as Midoriya taught her classmate the basics. Uraraka gave her teacher her full undivided attention, mimicking his stances when told to. Then, once he was done, the teen called Pony over to help Uraraka practice on a living person. Once he was done explaining to the pair how they were going to be training, their green-haired instructor had approached Mina. "I think I have an idea on how to approach your quirk," Midoriya had said after Mina gave him a detailed run of her quirk. "But before I tell you anything, I need to know, can you produce acid anywhere on your body or is it just confined to your hands and feet?" "Anywhere on my body," Mina had said as she held up an arm, forming a small amount of her least dangerous acid in her palm. "I guess it's just easier and more convenient for me to form it on my hands and feet. My basic strategy has always been to keep moving, sliding around on my acid while flinging a more powerful type from my hands. A decent mid-range strategy, Midoriya had said with a nod. Though, it won't be as effective when you are dealing with someone who has better long-range capabilities or can get up close to overpower you. Do you have anything for those types of situations? What about when you are in a narrow area like a hallway? What about when you are in a situation where civilians are nearby, where a single missed shot could seriously harm them? All Mina could do was stare at the other teen for a moment before a nervous laugh overtook her while looking away. That had been some of the stuff she had been working on with little to no success at this point. For example, when she was trying by herself to fight in the narrow hallways of the battle trails, Mina's best idea was to rush straight ahead while flinging as much acid as she could. It was an idea, though one she knew wasn't all that good. If she fought against someone like Bakugo in that situation, he would have unleashed explosion after explosion at her to not just blow her acid back but herself as well, possibly even burning her badly. She had been telling herself that she was just starting on it, that expecting results right out of the gate was too much and that she would come up with a better plan later. It was just figuring out what to try next was a bit harder than she imagined. Thankfully, Midoriya didn't seem to have that problem. He gestured for her to follow him to a corner of the gym where several punching bags hung, suspended in the air by specially reinforced chains to keep them from flying off. Anyone with superhuman levels of strength not named All Might would have a hard time sending them flying. But along with them was something a bit more disturbing: stick dummies. There were 4 of them, each having transparent skin that allowed you to see all the bones in their bodies as well as organs and major blood vessels. Once they were in front of the first stick dummy, Midoriya held up a clenched fist. Mina remembered how she looked at it dumbly, wondering what was going to happen before small spikes came out of his knuckles. The pink girl let out a yelp, jumping back in a panic at the sight. Back when I first started training with my quirk, this was one of my earliest ideas, something that would help make my punches more dangerous. However, I quickly abandoned that idea, he had explained. Then, as if to illustrate his point, he began to punch the dummy with both fists. Mina watched in awe as blow after blow was delivered with such grace, until she felt something land on her face. Without really thinking about it, she had brought a hand up to wipe it away before spotting the color. Red. A blood red. That's when she noticed the blood spilling out of the puncture holes Midoriya had created in the dummy, running down its body before dripping onto the floor as well as coating the teen's hands. Focusing more on the insides of the target, Mina was almost terrified at what she saw. The kid with the plain, yet kind face, would have been hauled away for murder had this been a real person. Several ribs were broken, bent inwards to either puncture an organ or had been pulled forward. She could see a massive amount of internal bleeding and the guts along the midsection might have been shredded. Thankfully, Midoriya was finished and took a step back. My quirk, Bone of my Sword, allows me to manipulate my bones, he had said. I can make them harder than steel and sharper than a blade. That's why I always need to be careful with how I use my quirk. Mina recalled nodding dumbly to this. She remembered thinking about what 13 had said at the USJ, reminding them on how dangerous their quirks could be. At the time, Mina had thought she had understood what the space hero had meant. Now, she realized she had been kidding herself. During the battle trials, no one had gotten seriously hurt. Not enough to be taken away to Recovery Girl's office, just cuts and scrapes and burns. And when 13 had described what her quirk could do to a living person, well, that had been left to her imagination. Now, before her, was the proof of what could happen to a person. Just how dangerous a quirk could be. How easy it was to kill someone with it, if that had been her. However, I believe something like this would be more suitable for someone like yourself, continued Midoriya. What? Mina had asked, taken aback by what he said. You can control how powerful you can make your acid, explained Midoriya, a light smile on his face. I'm sure you know that sweet spot for your quirk, something strong enough to hurt your opponent without killing him. Maybe just leaving them with skin irritation or minor burns. Just coat your knuckles in that solution and deliver some powerful blows to the dummy here. It's a simple but effective combination. From there, Midoriya worked with Mina personally for some time. It proved to be a unique challenge to the pink-skinned girl. She already knew the pH level he was asking for and she had been able to quickly form the small amounts of it to coat her knuckles. That had been the easy part. The hard part was doing it over and over again. Midoriya wanted her to coat her knuckles with this acid right before every punch until she could do it without thinking. Over and over again, she punched the dummy. Sometimes she would see that the acid was getting weaker, barely doing any damage to its skin. Other times it was too powerful, eating right through it. Yet, Midoriya never lost his patience with her, never told her that he just expected her to get better. Instead, he offered whatever help he could, even bringing up some imaging exercises that he himself used. Eventually, she got much better at it. After a while, Mina and Uraraka were told to move over to the weight machines. There, the pair of girls worked every muscle in their bodies. The other teens around them would not let them settle with what they were comfortable with. No, they all pushed the pair to go beyond. Plus ultra. By the time this part of the training was over, Mina felt like she was about ready to puke, followed by an irritation due to the fact that only Uraraka seemed to feel her level of discomfort. Were they done after that? Oh hell no. As a group, they ran around the faux city that All Might's battle training had been held in. Starting from the entrance, they ran around the perimeter. Then they were all meant to scale the side of one of the 6-story buildings. Those with quirks not suitable for this needed to rely on those who had the quirks needed. Thankfully, Mina had Uraraka who, despite already feeling like she was going to puke from their workout, managed to remove gravity from the pair so they could make it up with the rest of them. Now on the roof, the running continued. Everyone ran, jumping from building to building and even tightrope walking over a thin wire to prepare themselves for whatever they had to deal with in the sports festival. At one point, they even had an automated gun firing paint bullets at them at moments when they were at their most vulnerable. When that was finished, they were all split into smaller groups to work on team combo moves. At least that was the last part of the night's training. As the two girls managed to stumble their way back to the locker rooms, the 1B students seemed to look at them with a bit more respect, like they thought they would quit or brag about how easy it had been. Perhaps they saw just how draining it had been for the two, yet despite that they pushed forward. Now back in the present, Mina was hoping she could do all that again. Midoriya had told her before she left that he wouldn't be able to train with them as he and Pony had to meet someone from the States. But he assured her that Kendo would be more than capable to help her. And, if she was too busy, then she could turn to Kan. Just then, the door to the classroom was swiftly opened, making a loud thok sound. This drew everyone's attention, including Ida, who rose to his feet while adjusting his glasses. "See here, you two," he all but yelled, one hand continuing to adjust his glasses while the other arm began making a chopping motion at Minda and Monoma. "Have you no respect for the property of this fine institution? You could have broken the door that countless fine upperclassmen have passed through." Mina managed to find the strength to properly sit up, shooting a glare at the vice rep which seemed to go completely unnoticed by him. This got him to react instantly. Someone slamming the door open and not students getting harassed. "Never mind that," shouted Monoma as he rushed to the front of the class, standing in front of Aizawa's desk with his phone in one hand. Behind him was his tiny partner in crime, eyes wide and almost looking bloodshot. "We have a serious problem on our hands. The very status of our class, our superiority, is being challenged by 1B. Those fiends." Hearing that caused Mina to take in a breath, doing her best to hold in how nervous she felt. Slowly, carefully, she moved her eyes over to Uraraka to see that she was looking right back with clear nervousness in her eyes. Had those two found out about 1B's training? Well, it's not like it was some big secret or anything like that. There were tons of ways those two blowhards could have found out. But, if they knew, then there was a chance that they knew that two members of the class were joining them. Knowing them, they would pressure and harass the two girls into revealing all of 1B's quirks in order to get an edge. "The school paper just announced that." "UA has a school paper?" asked Zero, interrupting Monoma. "It's digital. Just check out the school's website," said Minda before pointing up at Monoma's phone, which was now being held at arm level. "But never mind that. The stupid paper decided to update their top couples by year. And the cutest couple for first years went to a 1B couple." Several students allowed themselves a confused sound before approaching the extended phone. First among them was Toru, who had practically jumped out of her seat. "Oh my god, they look so cute together," she cried, the floating clothing shaking back and forth as she held in a squeal. Now curious, Mina rose from her seat, as did several other students in the room. What she saw was definitely cute. The picture of the pair was of Midoriya and Pony, both of them sitting under a tree on school grounds. The horn girl was sitting on the bone quirk user's lap, pointing and smiling at something in the distance as a wind blew through her hair. As for Midoriya, he was laughing as well. All throughout the image, you could almost feel the love they had for each other in this moment, as if it were a tangible force that was oozing out of the screen. Glancing to the side, she saw clearly that several of the guys were looking on with clear jealousy written on their faces. And while Tsu and Toru were harder to read, she could see the blush on Momo's face as her hands shot to her face. "You're right, they do look cute together," agreed Uraraka as she too began to gush over the image. "This is something we cannot stand for. To not include the superior class of 1A in such a list is an unthinkable action," exclaimed Monoma, looking like he was about to burst into tears. Meanwhile, Mina showed off his jumping ability by leaping onto Mr. Aizawa's desk while still pointing to the phone, as if to make sure everyone there kept their attention on it. "Such wasted energy," muttered Takoyami from his seat, arms crossed and looking away from the rest of the class. He was among those who had shown little to no interest in what was going on. Todoroki remained in his seat as well, head resting on his hand as he stared at the wall with a look that seemed to scream that he was bored with everything. Then there was Bakugo, feet on his desk as he stared at the ceiling with his usual pissed-off expression. "Look, we need to get our class on this list," insisted Monoma. "This is a golden opportunity for our class to shine brightly once more before we become yesterday's news. The public goes nuts for heroic celebrity couples. If the press finds out that we have a superstar couple right here, they will be sure to give our class extra attention. Seeing them together might give them fans before they even make their first heroic appearance." Groups gossiping around the couple shall spam the web, bringing more attention to them as well as the rest of the class. "Why, we might even get reporters coming up to us and asking about them." Okay, said Sato, raising himself to his full height as he gave their blonde classmate a questioning look. "But you know there's nothing much we can really do, right? Mr. Aizawa made it very clear what will happen if he catches any of us dating. Yeah, but that's only if he catches us, said Kaminari with a laugh of his own before giving everyone a thumbs up. You do realize that if we want people to think there's a couple in the class we have to put it out there, right? Asked Shoji, one of his tentacles moving close to the electric quirk user before becoming a mouth. All while the main head just gave him a deadpan look. He's going to find out it's on the school's website. Haha, such an issue is barely an inconvenience for the superior minds of Class 1A, exclaimed Monoma with a wild grin. For you see the devil is in the details. None of us shall be dating, for it will all be a farce. A ploy upon the school and the media. That doesn't sound very heroic. Ribbit, stated Sue. She actually frowned deeply at that. Hey, as long as no one gets hurt then it should all be good, said Kaminari with a grin. Besides, it might actually be fun. So, who do you have in mind for this forbidden class romance? Huh, now you are getting it, exclaimed Monoma. Yes, we shall craft the perfect narrative that shall capture the imagination of our fellow classmates. They shall watch in awe, cheering them on and, by extension, the rest of us as well. I'm beginning to think that you would have been better suited in the business course, muttered Gyro as she moved back to her seat. Well, whatever you blockheads decide, leave me out of it. Like we would ever use a curveless, flat as a board girl like you, snipped Minta. Gyro, who had been twirling her jacks, turned to glare at the small grape-themed pervert with a look that would have made Endeavor say it's getting hot in here. Thankfully for Minta, Monoma was already on the move. Not to worry, Gyro, there shall be no need for your assistance in the matter, he said proudly. For you see, we shall need a pair that is like night and day. A beautiful belle of the two act is the stark contrast to the ruggedly handsome beast. A lady whose kindness can peer into the soul of something foul, seeing the good buried deep within. Yes, we need Bakugo and Uraraka. Wait, what? Screamed Uraraka as she was suddenly pulled off to the side. Before Mina knew what was happening, both Uraraka and Bakugo were brought to the back of the room, which was beginning to fill with laughter. The smallest of smiles graced her lips as a feeling she had not experienced in a homeroom since middle school took hold of her. Sure, Uraraka looked like she could die from embarrassment at any moment. Sure, Bakugo's teeth were clenched tightly and his eyes were white while in a narrow glare as Sato and Kirishima used all their might to hold him in place. But the feeling of everyone else goofing off and doing something silly, something she knew they would look back one day with a grin, was much too powerful. Around her, her classmates were pulling out their phones as they laughed and cracked jokes mainly at Bakugo's expense. Even the normally cold Todoroki turned to watch what was unfolding with a hint of amusement. Then, just as Mina was about to give her friend an apologetic smile, all the good vibes in the room exploded. What the F is wrong with all of you shits? Screamed Bakugo as he shoved away Kirishima and Sato, nearly knocking them down. Everyone became silent as Bakugo stood there, back hunched over and arms extended as he panted like some sort of wild animal. Fear now seemed to ripple among the class, some even taking a step back. Then, Kaminari spoke up. Hey, relax man, he said with his hands raised in a surrendering manner. It's fine, just having a good laugh is all. If you don't want to do this then we can find someone else. That's right, there's no need to be so hostile, added Momo, whose hands were also raised in a similar manner. We shouldn't be doing this at all, you worthless extras, growled Bakugo, looking a bit less likely to attack his classmate. Though the danger was still there. Slowly, Mina's attention shifted from Bakugo to Ida before a frown appeared on her face. The taller teen was just standing there. Where was all that discipline he wanted to dish out over a door? At least Momo was trying to calm things down, trying to act like a class leader. Come now, who better to represent the superior nature of one of the new Bakugo, urged Monoma, who clearly didn't want to let this go. Yet even as the copy quirk user spoke, Bakugo just brushed past him with an angry huff while returning to his seat. You, the teen who scored the highest this year in the entrance exam versus the second place holder. The two of you finding love. Surely you don't want to be upstaged by that inferior fool. We need to take that guy down, Minta yelled, waving his fists in the air. It's just not fair. How can such a plain-looking loser like him get a hot babe like her while I'm stuck with nothing? Daddy thinks he's so much cooler than us. Well, just wait until the school hears about you. They'll forget all about that loser. Wait, you mean we were really going to spread this around the school? Asked Momo, suddenly looking scared and nervous. I thought we were just joking around. Having fun. If I had. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, Uraraka. While the wealthy girl was apologizing, Mina's eyes had gone wide. Then, she turned on the pair so quickly that they both jumped back in shock. Damn it, Monoma, growled Ishido, surprising the class as her normally cheerful and excited tone was nowhere to be found. More people were taking a step away from her, the pink girl's fist shaking in anger as she looked at the blonde-haired braggart along with his sidekick. How could she have been so stupid? Maybe because the idea of doing something as a class sounded so appealing to her that she had forgotten to look at the source. Well, like hell she was going to keep quiet about this. She had been quiet for far too long already. That's what this is about. Finding a new way to antagonize 1B. Is the fact that two of their classmates are happy that upsetting that you have to do something like this? Or is it the fact that the rest of the school recognizing it that's the problem? That's enough, Ishido, said Ida, adjusting his glasses with one hand while the other was doing that stupid chopping motion. Seeing that caused Mina to bare her teeth as she shot the vice rep a death glare. No, I'm sick of this, exclaimed the pink-skinned girl loudly, causing most of the rest of the class to stop and look at her. Ida tried to approach her, to cut off whatever she was going to say, but Mina pushed him out of the way before returning her gaze to Monoma and Minta. I've kept my peace on this because you promised me, Ida, that you were going to handle it. That you were going to talk to them. Well, it looks like politely talking to them isn't going to get the message across. I'm sick of them bullying our classmates and acting like war heroes after what happened at the USJ. She then returned her glare onto Ida, who seemed stunned by this outburst. I'm sick and tired of you being so slow when it matters. Ship a desk and you're on us before we even know what we did, going on and on about how important they are. But when it comes to living, breathing people, you just drag your feet. I mean, you just heard Monoma talking about how they are going to harass 1B. Did you bother to say anything then about how improper that was? No. What about when Bakugo was swearing his head at us? Nothing from you again. It's me calling them out on their behavior that gets you moving. It's like you're condoning their behavior. Ida's face went scarlet, mouth dropping. And now see here, he began only to have the pink-skinned girl cut him off. But do you know who I'm most angry with? Myself, she said with clenched and trembling fists. I'm angry at myself for not doing more to stop them. Maybe if I had just taken matters into my own hands, we could have been getting along with 1B this entire time. We could have gone with them to that beach cleanup and party. We could be getting along and having fun while training to be the very best heroes we can be. It took a moment for Mina to realize that she was panting now while she felt the rest of the class's eyes on her. Some of them actually looked a bit ashamed. Perhaps they agreed with her. But before she could dwell on it, Bakugo spoke up. Listen, Raccoon Eyes, we're not here to make friends with all these extras, said the blonde. Quickly inhaling angrily, Mina turned around to see her classmate standing near his desk with his hands in his pockets and a sneer on his face. I could care less about what they think of us. In the end, their opinion means nothing. Hey, speak for yourself, man, said Kaminari. I was actually starting to hit it off with one of the girls in the business course. Now, she doesn't want to be anywhere near our class. Oh boo-hoo, spat Bakugo in a mocking tone. Like anyone cares about whose plug you wanted to F. Why you? Snarled Kaminari, sparks dancing around his body while crackling in the air. Both his hands were set into fists, ready to fight at any moment. Yet, despite this showing, all Bakugo did was pull one of his hands out of his pocket. With a confident smirk, he made several tiny explosions go off in the palm of his hand. If you want to die right now, that's fine by me, he stated, a murderous smile appearing on his face. One less piece of shit for me to walk over when the sports festival arrives. That's enough, both of you, said Momo as she got in between them. At once, Kaminari's electricity stopped its sparking. As for Bakugo, his smile turned into a look of disdain as he returned his hand into its pocket. We're classmates. This isn't how we should. Oh, would you shut the F up about that bullshit? Raged Bakugo, spit flying and landing on Yaoyorozu's body as he screamed. Hasn't it gotten through your shitty skulls by now? It's every man for themselves. So I don't give a F what you think of me or what the F you all do. Sparky over there wants to whine about not getting some whore to spread her legs for him. Go right ahead. Those two dipshits want to waste their time on stupid extras. Let them. Raccoon Eyes wants to get along with all those worthless no-names. Fine, whatever. Because, at the end of the day, all that shit is meaningless. All that matters is winning. Proving who is stronger than the rest. That's what the pros are going to be looking at. All those shitty people out there will be cheering for the one who is still standing while the bloody corpse we leave behind will be forgotten. So, if you don't want to embarrass both me and your shitty selves, drop this idea that any of us can get by with the power of friendship and motherfing unicorns. Because that can't happen. As Bakugo finished his statement, he raised a middle finger in the direction of Momo and Mina. While Mina just shot the teen a heated glare, Momo looked scandalized. Slowly, the rest of the class began moving towards their seats in silence, some gritting their teeth and shooting the ashen blonde a hate-filled glare. However, Mina was once more angered by Ida's lack of actions as he just took a seat as well. Perhaps it was just easier for him to make a fuss over objects than defend people. If that was the case, he was a poor excuse of a hero. So many of them were. She couldn't take this. She had to get out of this damned classroom. Thankfully, she knew how. HR. A bit later, Ken was in the teacher's lounge going over what he planned on reviewing for his afternoon class with 1B. He had already watched the footage of his class's lesson with All Might, rewatching it several times while making as many of his own personal notes. Now, the only thing left for him to do was to go over All Might's own notes on the matter to see if any of them aligned. Ken, do you have a moment? The blood-themed hero looked up from his work, spotting something you really didn't see every day. It was All Might, nothing but skin and bones as he walked into the room holding two mugs. Ken kept his expression neutral while keeping his eyes on the other man's face. The number one hero didn't even try to conceal how nervous he was. But despite that, his hands were steady, placing a steaming hot cup of coffee in front of Ken before taking a seat directly across from the man. I brought you some of Lunch Rush's coffee, said All Might, doing his best to smile ... and for once failing in the act that had made him so famous. Still, Ken smiled at the thoughtful gesture before picking up the mug. You have my thanks a million times over for this, he said with a laugh before taking a sip. Oh yes, the moment the hot liquid touched his tongue it was enough to make him groan in pure delight. Finally, real coffee. There's no need to be so dramatic, said All Might, raising a hand. But there was now a hint of a genuine smile tugging at his lips. However, that died as soon as he lowered his hand. Especially since I messed up again. I know it's too late, but I wanted to apologize to you. Kan glanced down at the black liquid in his mug, seeing his reflection staring right back at him. In truth, he had a feeling about what All Might was about to say. There was a part of his that wanted to dismiss the matter entirely. However, he wanted to see where this went. That and to see if improvement was possible. He was, after all, a teacher at heart. So, slowly Kan lowered his mug onto the table along with the tablet in his opposite hand. Then he crossed his arms over his chest while putting on the same neutral expression he used when talking to villains. About what? He demanded. All Might seemed to cringe at that tone, quickly looking away while scratching the back of his neck. I messed up with your class, he said, his tone slightly defeated. I should have contacted you when I found out I would be teaching your class yesterday. But I got swept up in the moment, so excited and wanting to put on a good show for the students that I failed to understand how much you had been covering for my selfish behavior. Because of that, I made a fool of myself and hurt those kids even more. I managed to whip something up real quick, though we both know that shouldn't have happened. I should have tried talking to you, asking what you had taught them in my absence instead of assuming that they were still at the starting point. The man's shoulders then stiffened as he sat straight up. Now, there was a fire in the sunken eyes of the slender man. Those orbs locked dead on into Kan's. As someone who is famous for saying I am here, the truth is that I haven't been living up to that. That is inexcusable for me, and it is well past time that I started to correct it. So, I was hoping to find out what you have taught those students so that I may start doing just that. Kan said nothing at first, only picking up his mug to take in a large gulp of the coffee that had cooled down. As the liquid ran down his throat, the blood-themed hero mulled over the words of his fellow teacher. Then, as Kan moved the mug away from his lips, the man let out a sigh. I believe we are both to blame for yesterday, said Kan slowly as he sat down the mug. No, the blame is all mine, and began All Might, hands raised only to have Kan silence him with a look. All Might, don't get me wrong. You hold the majority of the blame, said the silver-haired man. It was because you were absent so often that you came into my class unprepared. And yes, you should have been the one to reach out to ask what I had taught them, like how a teacher should. There was then a sigh as Kan looked down at the desk separating the two. But you're not really a teacher, are you? At least not a professional or one that has been doing this for some time. You're still new to this. I should have taken that into account. Instead of waiting for you to come crawling over to me, it would have been better for my students if I had just sent you an email about what we had covered. Slowly, Kan looked up so that he and All Might locked eyes, both showing the utter sincerity in their gazes. Then Kan leaned back in his seat. I'll tell you what, how about we start over? Offered Kan. If you have any questions or need advice, feel free to reach out to me. Then a slight smirk appeared on Kan's face. As long as you can handle some constructive criticism. They got a chuckle out of All Might, nearly coughing up some blood as he did so. Well, that is certainly a better offer than what I get from Aizawa, admitted All Might. Usually the man makes a snide remark about my teaching skills, like how I'm the living embodiment of irresponsibility. Kan let out a slight chuckle at that. Well, sometimes you do deserve that title, admitted Kan, causing All Might's shoulder to slump. But, saying that and doing nothing isn't going to fix the underlying problem. All Might sat upright again as he nodded. Then I'd like to take you up on your offer. Right now, in fact. If you have the time, that is. Kan grinned, showing off his enlarged canines as he did. Oh, I have some time. Not enough to go over all your mistakes, but... He began making All Might shiver. However, seeing that his fun was done, Kan shifted back into teaching mode. Now, first off, I want to know why you wanted to start off with a battle trial as well as why you changed it so obviously. Please, take all the time you need. All Might blinked at him, clearly showing that he was confused by the question. But, after a moment, he brought a bony hand to his chin as he began to speak. Well, I wanted to get an idea for myself where they all stood combat-wise, he began. Using team battles like that saves time, allowing me to see how well they understand their quirks in various situations. I understand that most of these kids have never been in a situation like these before, so seeing how quickly they can adapt is also helpful. If they can't figure it out, then they need to figure out how they can compensate. Like say scouting the area while staying safe or using hand-to-hand combat. But, most importantly, I wanted to see how well they could work together. For example, Todoroki in one has a powerful quirk. But because it's so powerful he handled the entire test all by himself with barely speaking to his partner. Kan nodded, understanding the issue at once. That lack of communication could get someone killed when out in the field, said the 1B homeroom teacher. Not to mention the fact that he might panic when he comes across a situation he can't just freeze over. I'm hoping you talked to him about this. Well, I sent him an email discussing my concerns, began All Might, only to stop when Kan shook his head. Not good enough, said the more seasoned teacher. All Might, you need to talk to him. Think about how we deal with the people we save from a fire or natural disaster. We don't just set them down, go on our merry way, and then send a postcard asking if they're all right. It's something that needs to be done right away after the exercise is over. That way it's not just fresh in their minds but also so that they can understand just how serious our concern is. Not to mention making sure that they heard us. Ken let out another sigh. I am aware of how precious your time is, but if you want to connect with the students you'll have to talk to them more, even if it's over a screen. All Might nodded. That's a fair point. I never thought of it like that, he said. Then, he let out another sigh. Now, as for why I changed the battle trail, well, I didn't want them to think I was being too lazy. Plus, it was an important lesson given in the wake of the USJ. I agree with you on that matter, said Ken. We need to prepare our students for when something like the USJ ever happens again. Still, pretending that you had a different lesson plan all along won't earn you any points with my students. Lying to them will only cause more problems in the long run. While it's too late to change what happened, allow me to give you some advice for if this happens again, tell them what you told me. Yes, they have done that before, but you still want to see things with your own eyes. Or you can tell them that you want to see how much they have improved since the last time they did the exercise. Honestly, there is plenty that you could have. Ken was then cut off by All Might's phone going off. Over and over the loud voice of the pro hero proclaimed, a phone call is here. A phone call is here. The owner of said phone pulled it out, wincing as he saw the contact. Something important? Asked Ken. He watched as All Might stared at the phone for a moment or two, clearly having some sort of internal debate. And much to the blood-themed hero's surprise, All Might's finger slid across the red icon to dismiss the call. Nothing that can't wait a bit, said All Might while sending a quick text. Then he pocketed the phone before looking back up at Ken. Now, where were we? And so, the conversation between the two men continued until the end of their break was near. While there were times when Ken had to be a little more critical of his colleague, he was glad that the man took it all in stride. There was even a brief moment when All Might began taking notes of his own, reminding Ken of a certain green-haired young man in his class. When that time finally came to end Ken's lecture, both men did so on far better terms than they had than the previous one. All Might was the first to leave, asking if he could count on Ken to give him more advice should he ever need it. The blood-themed hero barely said yes before the other man bulked up before rushing out of the room to get ready to meet one and all while shouting his thanks. Vlad King only chuckled at the antics of his co-worker before gathering his own work, knowing that he would have to be careful when going over the notes with the class. Yet, as Ken stepped out of the teacher's lounge, he was met by an unexpected sight that caused him to stop in his tracks. There, standing before him, were two of Aizawa's students, Ashido and Uraraka if memory served him correctly. If you're looking for Aizawa, he isn't here right now, said the man in a kind yet firm tone. He was then about to remind them that break would be ending shortly and that they should make heading to their homeroom only to stop when the two presented him with papers. Ah, what is this? We'd like to transfer to your class, said the two girls together, somewhat close to being in unison. HR, I'm sorry I had to call you back, said All Might. Lunch was over, his conversation with Ken taking up the entirety of his lunch break. Not that the pro hero minded much. If going into the afternoon slightly hungry was the price he would have to pay to make the needed improvements, then it was a price he was willing to pay. His plan for today was to put what he had learned into practice as he gave Aizawa's class the same lesson he gave 1B's. After all, it was an important lesson. So here he was now, striding down a special hallway that only teachers had access to, allowing him to move about freely in his skinny form. Thankfully, there were no cameras in this area either, as the sensors detected everyone moving along by their ID badge as well as a few other things. If there had been, he really would have looked like a fool moving about in a costume that he was practically swimming in. You're lucky I'm not on patrol or in the middle of a case, replied Night-Eye over the phone, his tone dripping with annoyance. Between doing my own hero work and doing favors for you, my free time is precious. So I would greatly appreciate it if you answered your phone during your lunch break. Not dismissing my call. Sorry, but I was getting some teaching advice from one of the other heroes, admitted All Might. I'm in enough hot water with them already. If things don't work out with Midoriya or Tagata, we will need another option. And it will be harder if I get fired. What All Might chose not to say was that he needed to restore his students' faith in him as well. For a man whose quirk allowed his glimpses of the future, his vision could be very narrow at times. It was likely he wouldn't see the point in something like that. At least, not for a single class when compared to the rest of Japan. I suppose you have a point, agreed Night-Eye, though it sounded begrudgingly. So, what's going on? Asked All Might. If it was an emergency, you would have sent in sauce to Nezu after I hung up. It's about that kid you had me looking into, said Night-Eye, the sound of paper rustling being carried over the phone. Now, I haven't scratched the surface much, but there is something here that caught my attention. It may be a problem. That caused All Might to stop in his tracks. Slowly he glanced at the screen, feeling his heart rate quickening. Well, what is it? He asked. According to his records, Izuku Midoriya was originally diagnosed as quirkless when he was 4 years old, said Night-Eye. However, his quirk registration was updated during his first trip to the States. So, by the sounds of it, the young man was just a late bloomer, replied All Might, an annoyed frown forming on his face. Honestly, with the way his former sidekick spoke, it sounded like he had uncovered something truly upsetting about the kid. Like wherever he went there would be a string of dead puppas littering the streets. On the surface, that is what it looks like, came the calm voice of Night-Eye. However, it wasn't his parents that updated the kid's quirk registration. that was handled by an American company called Houndhunt. The company handles a variety of quirk-related issues, studying various types of quirks to create a wide variety of products. From specialized clothing to medicines designed to help with certain negative aspects of quirks to military assistance. It's also the company that the kid's father works for. A small hum escaped All Might as he took all this in. Well, maybe it's a service they do for all their employees. I remember hearing back in the States that registering your quirk internationally was a big headache. To that, Night Eye cleared his throat. Possible. However, that wouldn't explain what else I found. Shortly after that visit, their family received a large sum of money from the company and his father was transferred to one of their facilities here in Japan. What that money was for, I have no idea. Somehow I doubt that it was some sort of bonus. All I know is that that money went to pay for a new house out in the country. Furthermore, according to my sources, Midoriya has been making trips back to their headquarters every year. There was then a pause. I also looked up his quirk. Neither his parents nor their parents had anything remotely similar to what the boy can do. Quirks are genetic. So I decided to broaden my search, thinking that maybe the mother had an affair or that the kid was secretly adopted. Or worse, what I found. Did you ever hear of the American hero Bonesaw? All Might let out a hum, his eyes moving to look up at the ceiling as he tried to recall the memory. Bonesaw, why did that name sound so familiar? Finally, the man admitted that he couldn't recall. Back when you made your big debut in the States, Bonesaw was an established hero located in New York, explained Night Eye. He was actually very popular, acting like one of their professional wrestlers as he fought villains. Not just that, but he had a pretty impressive success rate when fighting villains. He used the bones that came out of his body to stab and cut down his opponents, but always made sure that he brought them back alive. I see, said All Might, wishing that he could recall some of this. So where is he now? Still in New York, 6 feet underground, said Night Eye, his words causing All Might's eyes to widen. About a year after you made a name for yourself in America, a bunch of the quirk gangs decided they had enough of him. They came out, over 70 of them against one man. They threw everything they had at the man, everything from waves of fire, ice, vehicles on the side of the road, and even a giant poodle of all things to plain old bullets. Bonesaw kept going, not stopping until he had taken down the last villain with his dying breath. The man died a legend. All Might's hand reached to touch his forehead as a wave of guilt washed over him. On some level he felt guilty for not remembering a fallen hero who had done so much for the sake of justice, for paying the ultimate price to keep the people safe. However, the sad truth of the matter was that crime in America was insanely high, with heroic deaths being a daily occurrence. He recalled back then he would hear on the news every night the 7 or 8 stories about how a hero was tragically killed in the line of duty. And, sadly, they all began to blend together, becoming noise in the background as the days went by. Everything felt like it was on a constant loop, one that felt unending even to this day. Then All Might's eyes shot open. Wait, if he died that long ago then he couldn't be Midoriya's father, said All Might. Did he have any other children? None on record, said Night Eye with a sigh. He died single, but that didn't mean he wasn't seeing some sort of action. Right now I'm planning on looking into anyone still alive that knew him. Hopefully that might shed some light on the situation. However, there is another possibility that we should consider, all for one. It is possible that he arranged for Bonesaw's death, hiding in the shadows and letting those villains do his dirty work. Then, right before the man died, All for One could come in and take the quirk without anyone being the wiser. All Might's hand gripped on the phone a little tighter, so much so that cracks began to appear on the screen. Yeah, that sounded like something the ancient villain would do. While All for One mainly stayed in Japan at the seat of his empire, he did have agents all over the globe working for him. If this quirk interested the man so much, he could have contacted these agents to put the idea of ganging up on Bonesaw. Knowing All for One, he would have been there in some manner, watching the fight with a smile on his face until its conclusion. Then, in some manner, he would get close enough to the hero to steal his quirk and no one would be the wiser. After all, the dead can't report that their quirk was stolen. Taking a breath, All Might began to see where his former sidekick was going with all of this. All for One originally gained his following by taking the quirks of those who wished to be normal while giving them to those who hungered for power. And, to a degree, that was true of him up until his death at All Might's hands. He could see it clearly, parents wanting the best for their child with no one to turn to, wanting him to have a normal life. Then, here comes All for One offering their boy a quirk in exchange for either their loyalty or a favor. But, there was a catch, one that All Might was well aware of. He could have given them the quirk, but the body, well, that was a completely different matter altogether. Using Bakugo's quirk as an example, if All for One stole that explosion quirk and gave it to one of his underlings, it would give them a powerful quirk. Yet, the pores on the hands would not be as large, allowing them only smaller explosions without harming themselves. Not only that, but unless the person already had a quirk that protected the body from the heat and force of the explosion, then there would be a limited amount of times they could use Bakugo's quirk. Scratching his chin, All Might began thinking of Midoriya. If he applied the same principle to his student, then every time he pulled a bone out of his body, then there would be a hole in his skin that wouldn't heal right. At least, that's what he believed. It was a tricky situation. He understood Night Eye's concerns and worries, especially now that they believed that All for One could still be alive. If All For One had made contact with the Midoriyas, then there was a chance that the young man was being used as a spy, or something else. But, on the other hand, there was not enough evidence to support that he had met that monster. For all they knew, he could have just awoken a quirk while in the USA and the company did them a favor. All Might, came Night Eye's voice over the phone. I think we should play this safe. We should alert Nezu right away and have Midoriya detained until we can figure out what is going on. Nezu would never go along with that, not without proof, said All Might sternly. Look, I might not be the best teacher here, but I have checked in on the kid since I met him. As far as I have seen, he has been a model student who is going plus ultra. All we have are theories and suspicions. But began Night Eye, only for All Might to cut him off. Night Eye, before we continue, I need you to answer me honestly, said the pro-hero. Imagine if Bubble Girl approached you, saying that she believed that a local nursing home was really a front to sell the drug Trigger. All she had was a few odd payments made out to the place and that one of the guests was a man who had been caught several times selling it on the street. Would you raid the place then and there? Or would you look into seeing if the man was visiting a parent or grandparent? Would you check to see if the payments were just minor errors? Began Night Eye, his voice trailing off until silence took hold. Both men knew what his answer was. While Night Eye had his flaws, he was normally a very thorough man when it came to heroics. Both of them knew that in the situation that All Might presented, he would look into all these facts before making a move that would get him and his agency into any trouble. And the same should be true with Midoriya. All Might, I'm scared. That man, I know in my gut he's alive. He's had over 5 years now to plan his revenge, setting up all the pieces on a board that we can't see. We're not prepared. Your limit becomes more and more limited by the day. You're not as strong as you once were. We need to do something. And we are, assured All Might, his tone calm. He knew it had to be difficult for Night Eye, a hero who could see the future, dealing with so much uncertainty. But that doesn't mean we should jump at every little shadow and assume the worst. Just keep digging for now and we'll share what we found with Nezu, along with anything else you find. Then we'll go from there. Yes, that was the best thing to do. He didn't want to bring up the potential backlash of such reckless actions. If they had detained young Midoriya and his innocence was proven, then there were a lot of ways this could go. The best-case scenario was that he would understand and forgive them, which would be hard since All Might couldn't really explain the situation to the kid afterwards. He had done everything in his power to keep his fight with All For One a secret along with his injury. Plus, only a handful of people these days even knew about All For One. Right now, the only way All Might could see the boy understanding was if they explained everything, which was something the pro didn't want to do unless he chose this kid to be his successor. Which would be a pretty rocky start. Oh God, the kid might refuse the gift of One For All out of spite. Then what would they do? Then there were the worst-case scenarios. 1. Izuku Midoriya becomes disillusioned with heroism, seeing the people he admired as paranoid or above the law. This could jade him to the point where they would lose him as a potential candidate as the next symbol of peace. Or he might just leave UA in the heroic profession altogether. Something like that would be a huge shame given the lad's skills as he wasted his life as a paper pusher in some crummy office job. Then, there was the worst possibility of them all, he turns on them. Izuku Midoriya would become the very villain Night Eye thought of him as, forged by the Foresight quirk user's paranoia. They might even lose Tagada should he ever find out about this. Thankfully, Night Eye saw reason. All right, said the man. I should be done with this by the time the sports festival is over. With that, he hung up. Monoma chuckled to himself as he watched Mina from his hiding spot, the shadow of the building obscuring him from his classmates. His pink-skinned classmate was walking around in her gym uniform, happily talking with several of the inferior members of 1B. Walking a few paces behind her was that silly little girl who simply existed to drag down the rest of the superior class, Uraraka. He watched with cold eyes as some green-haired nobody wrapped an arm around her neck as they walked, as if they were friends. As he watched them, listening to some of them laughing, Monoma quickly glanced at his phone to check the time. Detention would be starting soon, and if he wasn't in his seat by then, Mr. Aizawa would be even more irritated with him. But this was important. While his lunchtime excursion to put those 1B fools in their place had been met with, shall we say, less than ideal results, what had happened afterwards was like a gift from the gods themselves. Oh Toru, she had such amazing information but none of the foresight to put it to good use. Yes, he had heard every word those girls had said, but it seemed like only Ashido and Uraraka were the ones trying to capitalize on it. No doubt they had buttered up those inferior hero hopefuls to allow them to train with them, allowing the girls to observe their strengths and weaknesses. A wonderful trove of information that they were going to keep for themselves. Seeing all this brought a sadistic sneer to the blonde's face as he watched them mill into the gym, hiding what they were doing from prying eyes. Oh, they thought themselves so clever now, didn't they? Well, two can play at that game. And he had borrowed the perfect quirk for the job, all thanks to the airhead who had first gifted him with this wonderful information. Once the cost was clear, Monoma activated the quirk he had copied, turning him invisible. Looking down at himself, he saw that he could no longer see his skin. His clothing, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. He could still see it, plain as day. Somehow he doubted that any of those fools would miss seeing a male student's uniform walking around the gym. Frowning, Monoma did the only thing he could think of, quickly removing all of his clothing, which was tossed to the side before heading over to the gym. While it was oddly freeing for the teen to walk across the campus completely with no one the wiser, it was also slightly painful. Since he had needed to take off not only his shoes but his socks as well, the teen was forced to walk barefoot. More than once he stepped on several small rocks and pebbles, feeling them digging into his flesh and causing him to wince in pain. Heck, some of them were oddly sharp. Then there were the gross things on his path. Things that stuck to the bottom of his feet, forcing him to stop and remove them with his hands, or made sickening noises as he stepped on them. Then, finally, he made his way inside. There he could see the inferior teacher of the course, talking to everyone. Something about Midoriya not being able to be there for today along with that whore of a girlfriend of his. Slowly, Monoma moved closer to the blood-themed hero as he tried to figure out what else he could do. This little announcement would eat up too much of his time and he doubted he could gather up all the information he needed before he had to head back for detention. Maybe he could mess with them. Maybe poke or slap their asses and get them to fight with each other. Or maybe mess up the gym equipment so they don't progress as far. Both options were good in the blonde's eyes. He just needed to. Monoma, what the F? Monoma, who had his eyes closed as he thought, opened them when he heard his name being called. Slowly he looked around, finding that everyone's eyes were on him, including the teachers. Each and every one of them looked stunned, with a few even smirking. But why? Wasn't he invisible? Slowly looking down, he found his answer. No, he was very visible now. Very visible and very. With a shocked cry, the teen tried to make a run for it only to be stopped when a meaty hand slammed down on his shoulder. Looking behind him, he saw that 1B teacher glaring at him with a fury that caused his skin to turn pale. Let's go see Aizawa. Now, HR. At the same time, Izuku was walking down the street dressed in one of his nicer outfits. It was something his father had helped him pick out shortly after getting his acceptance letter to UA, something for him to wear to semi-formal events. His pants for this evening were simple, dark-colored dress pants with matching shoes along with a belt. The teen also wore a white, button-up dress shirt with long sleeves that were slightly puffy. There was no jacket, but rather a simple dark green vest with golden buttons. According to his father, he preferred to wear these things when going to anything that wasn't a black tie event. It would allow him to appear formal while also giving him plenty of mobility for things like dancing should the need arise. Izuku thought he looked like a waiter. Glancing to his side, the teen gazed at Pony and not for the first time since they had gotten off the train. God, she looked beautiful tonight. The American girl was dressed in a CCK tail dress whose colors were similar to her hero costume. Starting from the top, where the neckline showed a tasteful amount of cleavage, it was bright orange. Then, along the waistline, the color began to fade more and more until you got to the bottom of her skirt, which was pure white. Speaking of her skirt, the front portion of it was shorter than it was in the back. The front stopped just above her knees while the back portion came to a point right above her hooves. The dress was sleeveless, allowing the horned girl's bare arms to wrap around his own as they walked. According to her, this was her creamsicle dress. Together, they walked down the street until they came upon their destination. The restaurant was a small, yet upscale place located near some of the more high-end hotels that Izuku recognized from the news. He could recall that one of them was constantly used by some of the top heroes in other countries when visiting Japan. Another one had been the location where All Might had stopped a hostage situation of a major businesswoman several years ago. Now that place regularly hires retired heroes to act as additional security. After entering the establishment, and being greeted by a server who was dressed eerily similar to Izuku, the two were taken past the main dining area to the back where the more private rooms were located. Standing in front of the door were two men, both dressed in black suits and wearing sunglasses, that Izuku knew. The one standing on the right was named Tom Enigma, a man with a quirk that was perfect for security details. Basically, he could sense radio waves. While he couldn't pick up what was being said, he could tell where they were coming from and where they were going. Meaning, if someone placed a bug in the room to listen in on what was being said, not only would Mr. Enigma know about it, but he could also track it down. He was also a rabid collector of old Hot Wheels, showing off his collection to Izuku whenever they had the chance. As for the man on the left, that man was named Nathan Scanner. Like with Enigma, Scanner also had a quirk that was perfectly fit for security. Basically, by looking around the room, he could tell how long that object had been there even if he didn't actually see the object. Meaning he could tell if something had been planted there recently, knowing exactly where it was. The man was also an avid ice fisherman, always taking his vacations in the wintertime and traveling north so that he could spend the entire time on a frozen lake. Every year he came back with pictures of his trip, showing them off to the curious green-haired boy. After doing a routine search on the two teens, both men opened the door. Together, Izuku and Pony entered the private room large enough to hold 30 people in it without anyone feeling claustrophobic. Yet there was only one table in the room, situated underneath a diamond chandelier where two people were already sitting. The first person that Izuku recognized was Mr. Blackhound. The man had long black hair that ran down his shoulders, though there were signs of gray hair peppered within it. His eyebrows were a tad larger than normal but well kept. He looked at the two teens with icy blue eyes through a pair of oval-shaped glasses that rested on a very crooked nose. One that looked like it had been broken far too many times to count and that not even Recovery Girl could ever hope to fix it. His hands were also crooked along with scars showing the number of times they had been broken before being put back together. Yet, despite all these visible scars, the man smiled at his guests warmly. As for the other person, Izuku, Pony, with a laugh, Carol Blackhound jumped out of her seat as she rushed over to the teens to wrap them in the biggest hug she could. Like her father, Carol had long black hair, though hers went past her waist with several braids on the sides of her head. Her nose was small and thankfully unbroken, her own blue eyes twinkling with excitement. Even though she was a few years older than the teens, if Izuku remembered correctly, she would be starting college next year. Both her size and shape gave her the appearance of someone much younger. This was made evident by the skin-tight dress she wore, putting on full display that she lacked any curves, as well as her chest, which one could only generously call small. "It's great to see you again, Carol," said Pony, speaking in English as they parted. "I know. It feels like forever since I last saw you too," replied Carol, her tone giddy with happiness. "Agreed. It is nice to see you again, Midoriya." "Tsunotori," said Mr. Blackhound, getting up from his seat before gesturing to the table. "Now, sit. We have the entire evening to catch up." Smiling, the teens walked back to the table, with Carol taking her spot next to her father while Izuku and Pony sat directly across from them. Seeing the menu in front of him, Izuku picked it up to find a long list of some of the finest and meatiest steaks from around the world. Each one of them served with a long list of sides, some of which Izuku had never heard of. "I do hope you enjoy the food here, Midoriya," continued Blackhound, his eyes glancing down at his own menu. There was a very hungry look in the man's eye as he stared at one spot in particular. "There are many fine Japanese steakhouses around, however I much prefer enjoy them the European way." Carol rolled her eyes at that. "Come on, Dad," she said with a laugh, smacking her father's arm with her menu playfully. "Just admit it. You just want your plate to be 90% meat and weighing 10 pounds. They got a laugh out of everyone at the table. A laugh that was echoed several minutes later when their waiter came out to take their order, Mr. Blackhound ordering the thickest steak they had before requesting that it be served drenched in the house's special garlic butter and sauteed onions. As for the rest of them, they all chose steaks of more agreeable proportions, as well as trying out the toppings as well. From there, the people at the table made small talk. Carol brought up her options for college, listing off the pros and cons of each of the top business schools in America. She even mentioned how one of the schools had recently employed America's top white-collar hero, number cruncher, to teach business ethics. That had gotten both Izuku's and Pony's attention, as they both knew of the hero who could find a dozen or so corporate misconducts in a single afternoon. Still on the topic of heroes moving on to teaching, Mr. Blackhound brought up a rumor that had been going around lately that the pro-hero unicorn, Pony's mother, was considering becoming a teacher of heroics. "She is," Pony said, her shoulders slightly slumped as she spoke. "It's something she's been thinking about for the last couple of years. Said that she wants to slow down a little, chasing students trying to cut class rather than villains." They got a good chuckle from the rest of the table. "Do you know where she'll be going?" asked Carol as their food was brought out. "Champions High," replied Pony. "She's going to be teaching heroics next year." Blackhound nodded at that before cutting into a streak that looked to be about an inch thick. "Champions is one of the top hero schools in Texas. Perhaps even one of the top in the country," said the man before taking a bite out of his food, closing his eyes to savor the taste. Then, when he looked at Pony, there was a twinkle in the man's eyes. "Though, she will be missed. Unicorn has always been one of my favorites ever since she saved me back when she was a fresh sidekick. I still have her autograph on my wall back at the office. But, don't tell your father about that, or he might get the impression that I hired him just because of her." From there they continued to chat while they ate, Carol wanting to hear everything about UA, including if any of the gossip about All Might was true. "Sorry, Carol, I just don't see it," said Pony, her hands covering her mouth to keep herself from laughing. All Might joining UA, to be with his secret love child that he had with Midnight. Izuku himself couldn't hold back his own chuckle at the image. Midnight was certainly something, he could say that. It was because of her first public appearance, the fact that she was one of the sassiest heroes in Japan, and her general demeanor that had given rise to plenty of rumors that she had FF'd just about every hero you could name. And Izuku, he could name plenty. Whenever she was seen working with any hero for more than 2 seconds, the media and the net would go ablaze with predictions on whether or not this was the person she was settling down with. That or they had just finished effing right before a disaster and decided to take care of it together. However, there were nothing more than rumors intended to create a bit of buzz in Izuku's opinion. So he took them with a grain of salt, laughing at the story. "Okay, maybe not Midnight," said Carol as she set down her utensils. "But the theory of All Might having a secret love child has some weight to it. The man's private life is kept secret, so much so that his real man on his registration has been redacted. Not to mention that his hero work isn't what it used to be." Izuku, despite himself, nodded before looking up at the ceiling while gently placing his fork on his lower lip. "Yeah, I noticed that as well," he mumbled slightly before lowering his head to look at the young hostess. "During my last year of middle school, we were given an assignment to track how much time heroes spend on the field. I remember you telling me about that. Didn't you bring to class 3 folders worth of newspaper clippings going back 20 years to use as source material, and a graph you needed 3 people to help set up?" As Pony said this with a smile on her face, she elbowed her boyfriend gently on the side. The memory of his teacher's eyes bugging out at the extent that Izuku took his fanboying of All Might on an assignment that had only been given 3 days ago, as well as the reactions of the rest of the class, caused Midoriya to blush. Mr. Blackhound let out a laugh. "You really are your father's son," he said between chuckles. "He did the same thing whenever I asked him for a presentation." "Anyways," continued Izuku, wanting to move past this embarrassment, "my research showed that in the last 5 or 6 years, All Might's appearances in the public have been on the decline. He used to be out there all the time, one time even going 4 straight days of dealing with villains back-to-back and natural disasters. But, back when I did that project, the max amount of time he was seen in public was around 3.5 hours. And that's where the theory of his secret love child comes in," continued Carol, raising her hands as if she were praising this idea. "There's actually a couple of theories going around. One of them is the whole All Might's kid is a teen who's been acting up a lot. Maybe it was the big guy's decision or his mistress gave him an ultimatum, but All Might began cutting back his hero time to be with the kid, even becoming a teacher so that he can make up for lost time with the kid. Another theory is that 5 years ago his kid was born and, well, has been cutting back on his heroing to take care of both his wife and child. And being at UA, it's a cover so people will stop talking about all the heroing he's missing out on. As interesting as that would be, there is a far simpler explanation for all of this. All Might is getting older," said Mr. Blackhound as the room became far more somber. "Much like Mrs. Tsunotori, no one can be a hero forever. You just start slowing down, getting tired more quickly, reflexes aren't what they used to be. You can try and manage this, do things to slow down the effects of age, but in the end it always catches up with you. I think All Might knows that his sun will be setting soon." Blackhound then let out a sigh before looking over at Izuku, his eyes now looking more serious, more businesslike. "To be honest, Midoriya, you are not the only one to notice that All Might's activeness has been on the decline. I have been in contact with the Department of Justice, Heroism, senators, and congressmen and women who have all expressed their concerns behind closed doors, as well as the Japanese government. Sad to say, officials here in Japan seem to be in a state of denial, claiming that we are being paranoid or just bringing this up for sensationalism. They say that the reason why All Might is less active is due to the fact that he is not needed as much, allowing other heroes to take the reins. I will admit that there might be some truth to this, but given the length of his hero career, it makes our point of view hard to ignore. And if the events of the USJ are any indication, others are coming to this same conclusion as well." "Wait," said Pony, almost standing up as she spoke. "The attack on the USJ failed thanks to All Might, so everything should still be fine." Blackhound gave Pony a thoughtful look along with the briefest of smiles. "I'm sure that's the same conclusion that many people are taking from the whole event. However, the Department of Heroism doesn't see it that way. According to some of the information we obtained from the Japanese government, the pro-hero eraser head as well as several students there reported what the leader of the League of Villains said during the attack. He said that All Might wasn't as strong as he used to be, that he was getting weaker. While it's uncertain as to how they came to this conclusion, the fact that they did, as well as recruiting a large number of villains to follow, is concerning. The Department of Heroism has theorized that, had the League gone in with more powerful and skilled villains such as Moonfish, everyone there would have died before All Might was alerted to the situation. It was then that Mr. Blackhound bit his lower lip while intertwining his scarred fingers. This attack also gave the US government a bit more weight to the theory that All Might is slowing down. We are aware that All Might was supposed to be one of the 3 teachers that day at the USJ. While 13 and Eraserhead never went into why he had called off. Strange how he was able to deal with a number of crimes before arriving at your school. Roughly 3 hours worth, give or take a few minutes. Izuku felt his heart drop in his chest as he heard this. If he was hearing this right, then Mr. Blackhound was suggesting that All Might had gotten winded or something after doing his hero work after only 3 hours. The idea just seemed so laughable since, well, they were talking about All Might, the greatest hero to ever live. Yet, with what he was hearing now along with his own past research, made him feel like his eyes were being opened to a truth that he should have noticed some time ago. And what he saw scared him. All Might was the pillar of their society, the symbol of peace. If said hero's time was being limited due to his age, then the number of problems this could cause would be a nightmare. If All Might used up all his time, and something worse happened later in the day, then the other heroes would have to find a way to deal with it on their own. Or what if a fight or a rescue mission went too long with him passing out or something during the middle? What if villains found a way to exploit this? Yet, a few things fell off to Izuku about this conversation. The first was about All Might and the USJ. If it was true and All Might needed to rest after only 3 hours of heroing, then why didn't he go to the USJ? If the man needed rest, he could have done so on the bus. Then, when one began its rescue training, he could have just stood on the sidelines. After all, no one knew that the facility was going to be attacked, meaning it should have been treated like a normal school day. Something just felt off, like he was missing an important piece to the puzzle. But there was a more important question that Izuku needed to ask. One that, after looking over at his girlfriend, Pony was wondering as well. "Ah, Mr. Blackhound," began Izuku slowly. "A lot of what you're telling us sounds really important. Are you sure you should be telling us all this? Blackhound's business mode softened slightly, giving the teen a reassuring smile. Yes, Midoriya, because what I'm about to tell you concerns you more than anyone else. And since Miss Tsunotori is aware of this, I see no reason why she shouldn't be made aware of it as well. Then, Mr. Blackhound took a breath while his eyes went to stare at his now empty plate. As I said, the US government is now working under the assumption that All Might's time as a pro will be ending soon. While the crime rate in the USA is still greater than other areas of the world like Japan, it still went down significantly a few years after All Might made his first appearance. Now the Department of Heroism believes that, once the man retires, the crime rate will skyrocket. So we have begun planning for when that will happen, though we don't have any idea when that will happen. It might be in 5 years or 5 days, so we are going to use every second available to prepare. Right now President Burke is talking to some of the top American heroes, like Stars and Stripes, to make sure they are ready for that day. What's more, the President is speaking with Congress to increase funding to all heroic schools as well as creating new programs designed to help those with powerful quirks get into some of the top-rated hero schools like Champions. But, even with all this, it might not be enough. So, I have been ordered to resume Project Quirk Rebirth. Uraraka stood within the girls' locker room at UA, completely as the water from the shower poured over her. A small groan of delight was kept in her throat as she just stood there savoring this treat. Due to the fact that she was living in a very, very cheap student apartment while studying to be a hero, her bathroom wasn't the best. The room itself was extremely cramped while barely holding the toilet and sink. When she wanted to wash herself in the morning, she had to sit on that toilet and use a rag. Not exactly the most efficient way to clean yourself. Still, it wasn't so bad. Instead of going to the local public bathhouse like the rest of the tenants, she could save money by just coming to UA. At the very least, both places would provide her with water that was reliably hot and not brown. While all this felt great for her, Uraraka couldn't help but feel a slight uneasiness within herself. The reason, Takage, as the brown-haired, gravity-nullifying girl began to soap up her arms starting from the shoulders, she peeked a glance over at the girl who had so openly hit on her. As she looked at her, she had to wonder if any of the other girls had a problem showering with a girl who had loudly proclaimed herself as bisexual. Weren't they worried that she would use this as a chance to ogle them, to check out their bodies? That she might pull a Minda, accidentally slipping or something to put herself and another girl in a sexually compromising position? It seemed like the answer was no. Takage had entered the shower, towel on her shoulder before hanging it up, and just chatting with Kendo before they both turned on the water. There were no wolf whistles as she looked at all the other girls showering, no smacking them on the ass, no wildly rude comments. She was just taking a shower and being respectful. Maybe the problem with Uraraka feeling this way was due to her being in contact with too many perverts. Said girl was facing one of the side walls of the open shower, making it so Uraraka got a good look of her backside. With just a glance, Uraraka could see several trails of water running down her back, one even entering the crack of the green-haired girl's admittedly shapely ass. The light from the ceiling reflected off the girl's skin, making its appearance almost radiant. She could only imagine what was going on in the front, trails of soap suds running down those breasts that were either a low D cup or an upper C cup. They would then trail down that smooth yet muscular stomach that some models out there would kill to have before making its way to her shaved sack. Something that nearly all of the students had been told to start doing when they were informed about their costume due to their skin-tight nature. Then there were the legs. Suddenly, Uraraka realized that this quick glance was moving into staring territory. Wait, had she been imagining Takage's front? Turning her head, she also understood what she had started doing. She was checking out another girl. Her heart began to beat a bit faster as her face became slightly flushed. She had never before thought of another girl in either the romantic or sexual sense before. Sure, she could admit when another girl was pretty, but that was different. So why was she suddenly feeling this way? Also, she knew she liked guys as she thought Midoriya was cute with those freckles, so much so that, if it weren't for his girlfriend, she might have considered asking him out. Oh wait, she couldn't do to Aizawa. Oh wait again, if she liked guys then why was she suddenly interested in girls? Was it because, for the first time in her life, someone had expressed interest in her and it just so happened to be another girl? Taking a breath, Uraraka looked down and frowned as another thought entered her mind. Out of all the girls here, why had someone as plain as herself caught the attention of someone as amazing as Takage? After all, the self-disembodying girl was one of only 4 students to get into the school via recommendation and had a very useful quirk. Her grades had to be in a league of their own, just like Yaoyorozu's. And she was super attractive. Meanwhile, Uraraka was the exact opposite. Her quirk was useless, sure, but in areas like construction to make everything lighter. She had had to work her ass off in the entrance exam and had only managed to get into the hero program with a single point. There was always this feeling surrounding her that, at any moment, she would get kicked out by Aizawa. And as for her looks, well, a small sigh escaped her, hands going into autopilot washing her body, as Uraraka began looking around at the other girls in the shower. As she did, it was like she was finally noticing for the first time just how attractive they all truly were. Nina, who was standing next to her, had that striking appearance that seemed both alien and yet not, along with a well-honed body from her years of dancing. The slightly deeper shades of pink on her puffy ass, the alluring eyes, and not to mention a shapely ass were all features that would make anyone long for her attention. Then there was Kendo. While being more muscular, it did little to distract from her cest and shapely figure. Shizaki normally had a stern expression, but like the rest of the girls here had that amazing model-like figure along with some additional benefits that would certainly catch a few eyes. Currently she was using her vines to wash her body, slithering around her limbs like various snakes while making sure not to cut herself with her many thorns. The very act itself could be seen as erotic, adding to her beauty. Then there was Yanagi who, despite being completely, somehow managed to keep the lower part of her mouth covered with steam. For a few seconds, Uraraka wondered how that was possible before giving up. The ghostly girl was still attractive. All the girls in 1B were just so hot. Then there were the girls from the other courses, like the Amazon slime girl from General Studies, Katayama. Despite having those massively heavy-looking breasts, Uraraka could see them jiggling alluringly with each step she took. Heck, even Kawakami had this sexy Lolita-like body. Then she looked back down at herself, her hands stopping as they washed one of her underbubs. Compared to all of them, she didn't feel all that special. She had a round face that a certain member of her class loved to point out and mock her for it. She wasn't fat by any means, but maybe a little too well-rounded. Her breasts were probably too big for her body type, making her look all the weirder. Along with all of her other plain features, it would be hard to stand out in this hero world. So, as she turned her attention back to Takage, she had to wonder what the girl saw in her. Just then, Takage stopped in the middle of her conversation with Kendo. She just suddenly stopped, the toothy smile she had fading into something akin to being curious as she turned to look at Uraraka. Realizing that she had been caught, Uraraka quickly turned her head away while her face heated up in embarrassment. Deciding she wanted to get out of here quickly before she could further embarrass herself, Uraraka decided to focus on washing her own body. As she did so, she listened to the conversations around her. "So what do you have planned for tonight, Shroom?" asked Komori, her eyes poking out from underneath her bangs to stare at Kawakami. Nothing special really. Since I'm free tonight, I'm going to be meeting Shinso at this nice little cat cafe a few blocks from UA, answered the Hydra girl. Though, as she said this, the snakeheads coming out of her back rolled their eyes. "Sis, you promised you would meet him there before classes started for the day. We had to work triple time just to make sure we got enough done so you could make it. At least you won't have to worry about your homework during your date. Why couldn't this school have bubble baths? I like bubble baths." Uraraka and Komori just ignored the randomness of the fourth snake sister's head as they both stared at Kawakami. They weren't the only ones since Kawakami's sisters hadn't kept their voices down. Now Mina was looking at the smaller, blue-haired girl with glee that came whenever she smelt juicy gossip. As for the rest, well, they certainly looked intrigued at the very least. As for Kawakami herself, said girl looked mortified. Like she wanted to dig herself a huge hole and then hide in it till she died. It's not like that," she protested, waving her arms in front of her as she spoke. "Shinso just wanted a little help designing his hero costume. So if he does well in the sports festival he can submit it right away. And it's not a date." As the other girls in the shower looked ready to pounce on her for more details, the other snakeheads decided to add more fuel to the fire. "Oh please sis, don't act like you haven't been hoping this would happen. You have been practicing making box lunches to give to Shinso. Not the store-bought kind, but something you made all by yourself." "Oh, what's this?" Suddenly, the fourth and most absent-minded snakehead began to extend its long neck towards the ceiling. It went into one of the corners before opening its mouth to bite down on something. A moment later, it retracted itself back to Kawakami, who held out her hands as an object was dropped onto it. Said object was small, so much so that it could easily fit within the center of Kawakami's hand and roll around. It wasn't all that long either, with a rectangular shape. Its black body was surrounded by some sort of plastic or something similar with a lens on one of its sides. "Is that what I think it is?" asked Shiozaki, her vines wrapping around her body before her hands could cover themselves. The other girls began mirroring the vine-haired girl to the best of their ability long before Kendo, Takage, and Kawakami all gave fearful nods. It was a camera. Someone had been recording them. A short while later, all of the students in the training class were moving down the hallway of UA. After doing a thorough search of the locker room, both of them, yes, it seems whoever put those cameras in the girls' locker room had also done the same to the guys. It hadn't just been in the shower, but whatever sick freak had done this had also placed them everywhere. Over the lockers to view the students changing. Some hidden within the lockers. There were even some place to record students as they went to the bathroom. Now dressed in their school uniforms, the students moved with fierce expressions while Kendo held a plastic bag containing the numerous little devices they had been able to collect. All but one, as Kawakami held one of the devices in her hand, a finger covering the lens as she examined it. "From the looks of it, this looks like one of the short-range spy cameras that UA offers third-year hero students," she said while her sisters looked around it as well. "You sure about that?" demanded Tetsu. Kawakami flinched a little at his tone, but after a moment nodded. "Yes," she said. "It was part of one of my assignments in the business course. We were assigned various equipment used by hero students that the school normally provides and stores. We were then assigned to track how often the equipment was used, along with giving damage reports along with a cost estimate to anything that was broken or lost. These look like one of the devices that we were monitoring. Besides, I can't find any serial numbers or other markings on these things other than the special code used by the school to track dishonest students who try to smuggle them out and sell them. Also, they are too well made to be something that was built in someone's garage. And, Power Loader keeps a very detailed inventory of all his supplies, especially now since he has this one first-year student who keeps breaking into the support lab to work on additional projects. He would have been able to cross-reference whatever she built with what he is missing to see that something didn't add up. That and the fact that once she makes something she moves on to the next invention. Oh, also, most of the stuff she's been making has a good chance of exploding right in your face, so I don't think this is her work. The blue-haired Hydra girl then noticed that no one else was talking. Glancing around, she noticed that all of the other students were staring at her. At first, Kawakami wanted to use her sister to hide her face, perhaps even use as a non-lethal mist attack in order to make a getaway. But before she could, she saw their expression shift to something positive. Your experiences within the business course have proven to be most helpful, said Yanagi while Kodai hummed in agreement. Oh, it's nothing, replied Kawakami as she lowered her head. Shinso, however, shook his head. It isn't nothing. We at least have a starting point. Better than stumbling around blind throughout the school. That would have given whoever did this time to get away. Makes me wish I had signed up for the business course instead of general studies. At that, Kawakami's sisters began to shudder before moving to get into the tired teen's face. Trust us, you wouldn't last. The work is far too hard and taxing for someone who looks half dead already. Not to mention the ethical issues of having someone with a brainwashing quirk learning make deals and contracts. Does your hair taste like grape juice? Before anyone could even blink, the fourth head lunged at Shinso's hair before chomping into it. Kawakami cried out in a panic, begging her sister to stop while the other heads bit into the attacking neck. Yet the fourth sister remained where she was, mouth closed around Shinso's hair while her jaw seemed to move in a chewing motion. After a while all the students could see large amounts of drool leaking out. Eventually, albeit longer than one would have thought, the sister decided that the hair did not taste like grape juice before releasing it. Sometime after the group found themselves in front of the doors leading into the third year's studio. The doors themselves reminded the Gravity Girl of the sort of thing you would find in one of those sci-fi movies, appearing thick enough to withstand an explosion and opening by sliding into the wall. There was even a keypad and card reader on the wall next to it. Though, oddly, there was also a sign hanging on the side of the wall, the picture depicting a person with pink dreadlocks and steampunk goggles with a red slash going right through it. After only a moment of standing in front of the door, Uraraka watched as Kendo and Takage took the lead with Kawakami right behind them and the rest of the group behind her. Once they were inside, Uraraka blinked at what she saw as it was not what she had expected. She had assumed that there would be piles of various machines, those standing metal coils with electricity running down them, metal claws coming out of the ceiling, and a fire extinguisher on wheels to put out the numerous fires. Instead, what she found were a series of desks, all facing a plasma screen that filled up half the wall. Each table had a 3-monitor computer with a keyboard embedded into the surface, and below that were a series of different-sized drawers. Lining the side wall where they entered as well as the back were a series of larger machines that looked completely alien to Uraraka. But what really drew her attention was what was along the wall directly across from them. It looked like there was a wall made of thick glass or something similar. The only way you could even tell it was there were the number of air holes that had been cut out as well as a specially made door. On the opposite side of the wall were numerous cabinets of all shapes and sizes, each one containing a different type of lock. Finally, sitting in front of the door at his own desk, was a student. His school jacket had been taken off and hung on the back of his chair, fully exposing his white button-up shirt and red tie as he kept his bespectacled gaze focused on the scenes in front of him. From what Uraraka could see, the upperclassman looked fairly average save that he lacked hair in the normal tradition. Instead, his locks had been replaced with feathers that seemed to naturally slick back, moving down the back of his head until they reached his neck. As the group made their way inside, their senior looked up from whatever he had been working on. At first, his expression was neutral and uninterested, so much so that he almost went right back to his work. Yet a moment after he had lowered his head, it shot right back up to look at the large number of people which he then scanned. Can I help you? He asked, sounding clearly uncertain. Wait, none of you are third years. If you want to make costume requests or check out equipment to test, you'll need to speak to your own support class. Uraraka watched as Takage placed a hand on the desk, leaning forward a bit while bending down so that she was not just closer to him but also at his eye level. Yeah, hi. We're not looking for either of those. We need to speak with whoever is in charge of all the third-year gadgets. Think you can help us with that? Then that would be me, the teen said, once more looking over all the students, like he was trying his best to place them. I keep track and record the checkouts of all equipment used by hero students for after-hour training. Well, that and making sure that pink-haired menace doesn't sneak in here and take our equipment. Again, that name's Kaiseitome. Good, replied Setsuna as she moved into a sitting position on the desk while keeping her eyes locked onto Saitome's. At the same time, her hand detached from her arm to take the small camera from Kawakami. Once she held it in her hand, her limb rejoined the rest of her body before dramatically placing the device between the pair of them. I heard that these devices were used by the third years. Can you please tell me who checked them out? When Saotome looked down at it, Uraraka noticed their senior seemed taken aback. Though, this only lasted a moment, for he licked his lips before picking up the spy camera, twirling it around in his hands. Was he honestly surprised to see that they had one? Or was it something else? Yeah, this is one of ours, said Saotome. Last time they were used was during an advanced heroics lesson at the start of the year. Funny, I could have sworn that they were all brought back. Must have been a mistake on my part. I'll have to make a note of this. What training area did you find this in? In the girls' locker room, replied Kendo as she then placed the bag containing the rest of the cameras on the desk, allowing them to spill out. Along with these found in both locker rooms. Saotome paled so much that his skin almost matched the color of his shirt. He seemed beyond nervous. He was terrified. His hands reached down, trembling as he picked up one of the devices at random to examine. Then, slowly, he looked up at the students who held Stony as they awaited an answer. This can't be happening, he whispered, almost to himself. Oh, it happened, said Takage as she leaned forward a bit, opening her mouth to reveal her razor-sharp teeth. At the same time, all of Kawakami's extra heads let out snake-like hisses while Shizaki's vines began to extend themselves in a show of force. Tetsu cracked his neck so loudly that everyone winced while Awase did the same with his knuckles. Now, who did you give all these to? Saotome shook his head before quickly turning to the door behind him. Body shaking, he pulled out a card from his pocket and held it up before the door opened. Uraraka, as well as the rest of the students, watched him like a hawk as he went straight to one of the cabinets. From there, as Saotome pulled out a large key ring, the gravity girl noticed something off. There had to be more than 50 nearly identical and unlabeled keys on that ring. Yet, not only did he find the key he was looking for, but he was right on his first try. Yet, the school year was still somewhat fresh, and if he was being honest about when those cameras were last used, it seemed odd that he would know that right off the bat. Still, she watched as the teen opened the cabinet and looked inside only to fall to his knees. Seeing this, several of the students made their way around the desk and towards the fallen senior. It didn't take long to find out what had caused this, as the cabinet was completely empty. No, this isn't possible, stammered Saotome, now appearing close to crying. Power Loader entrusted this job to me. Oh God, oh my God. What's he going to do when he finds out that I lost all of the cameras? I'm going to be expelled. Please, calm down, said Ibara as she moved beside him, a hand gently resting on his back. Hope is not lost. If you approach Power Loader honestly, confess to your failure, and produce the person responsible, then I'm sure that your teacher shall not be so severe. You might lose this position, but it would be better than being expelled during your final year. Why yeah, stammered Saotome before gulping dryly. Do you have any idea who might have done it? Asked Shinso. I don't know. I swear, all the hero students brought back their equipment. It can't be Mirio because his quirk won't allow him. Just then, Saotome's head shot up. Wait, there was someone else who might have done it. I caught him in the room one time after I had stepped out to see if Lunch Rush was still around to make something for dinner. The little freak was standing by the entrance with a bit of drool coming out of his mouth. Little freak, echoed Ashido in confusion. Then, her eyes widened before placing a hand on her head. Was he really short with purple S for hair? Saotome began to nod furiously. That's him. I thought it strange for a first-year student to be here. When I find the pervert, he is going to wish Aizawa had expelled him on day one, growled Ashido, a small amount of acid escaping her palms as she spoke. When the liquid touched the floor, everyone could hear a loud hiss while the contaminated surface began to bubble before dissolving. Thankfully, he won't have the chance to hide from us. He's either still in detention or just getting out of it. I say we find him and drag his sorry diapered ass to Nezu. As most of the rest of the students let out various noises of agreement, Uraraka kept her gaze on Saotome. She watched him, the fear he had just moments ago lessening. It was not completely gone, but the color of his skin was returning to normal and the shaking had stopped. Also, he looked like he was holding back a sigh or something. Like he had started to but stopped just before exhaling. Was this part of his quirk or was it due to something else? The gravity girl then noticed something else. That she wasn't the only one keeping an eye on the older support student. Takage was giving him a calculated look. Finally, Saotome spoke. As much as I'd love to join you all, there are some things I'll need to do. I want to do a complete inventory of everything here to see what else is missing. Then I need to write up a formal report and hand it to Power Loader. He then gave a nervous laugh, scratching the back of his head. Besides, I'd probably be more in the way if I did join you. Hey, it just means we get to pound the freak a bit more, growled Ashido before she turned and headed out the door with everyone else following her. Though not before Uraraka gave one last look at Saotome, the older teen moving back to his desk and quickly sitting down. As the group made their way into the hallway, a gnawing feeling grew within Uraraka's stomach as she thought about their encounter with the senior. And the more she thought about it, the more she analyzed it, the more that feeling grew. It grew quickly, so much so that by the time they turned down the first hallway, the gravity girl could no longer take it. Guys, wait, she called. She had thought she would have to say it again, louder in order to get their attention. However, she had almost failed to notice that most of them had already begun to slow down as they turned. Maybe over half of them. What's more, when Ashido turned to look at her, the pink-skinned alien girl's smile was back in full force. In fact, she looked ready to burst from laughter. Hey, why are we stopping? We need to find Mineta before he can leave, stated Tetsu, who was bouncing on his heels. Didn't any of that seem strange to you? Asked Uraraka in a nervous tone. While the steel quirk user scowled at her, Takage placed her hands on her hips while giving Uraraka an approving look. So you noticed it too, she said in a matter-of-fact tone. She then turned to Ashido. I'm guessing you picked up on it as well. Nice acting, by the way. Ashido let out a laugh, smiling brightly before taking a playful and over-the-top bow. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone here who helped make all of my annoyance to the purple pervert possible. Hey, can someone please tell me why we're not hunting down that purple freak? Demanded one of the general studies students. Because this is an obvious misdirect, replied Shinso, glancing over at Takage and Uraraka as he said this. At least, that's what I was thinking. Good to know I wasn't the only one. Yeah, said Ashido with a nod as she turned to look at the others. Look, I've been in the same room with Mineta far more often than anyone should ever be subjected to, so I have a pretty good idea on what he's all about. I can honestly see him pulling a stunt like this ... but only with the girls' lockers. The fact that we found so many in the guys' locker room tells me that this isn't him. Also, he probably doesn't even know we can rent these spy cameras. I don't know what you guys have been doing in your heroic classes, but so far we've been only using our own support equipment. Heck, Aizawa hasn't even told us we could rent out or borrow equipment from the support studio. Well, he could have heard about them from an upperclassman talking about his lesson, pointed out another student from general studies. I mean, the guy is short, so if he stayed quiet long enough he could easily eavesdrop an entire conversation without anyone being aware. Well, that is possible, said Kawakami with a nod. But I'm a bit more focused on how he would have gotten his hands on so many cameras. Mineta's quirk isn't exactly suited for theft. It's more for mobility and capture. From what we just saw, in order to get into the storage area you would need a special key card. Then in order to get into the cabinets there are individual keys. The key card is something that he might, and I stress the word, might have left on his desk if he did go out for food like he suggested. Thought it would have been smarter to leave it in the desk or just keep it on his person. But even then, we all saw that he keeps the key ring on him even when he's alone. In order for Mineta to get in, Sayatome would have needed to leave both the card and the key ring behind. That's when the other heads chimed in one after the other. The guy never questioned why a first-year student was there, standing on his desk. Bozo never checked to see if anything had been tampered with. Heck, shouldn't he be doing an inventory of all that junk regularly, especially after the break-in? Well, he does have feathers for hair, so maybe he has a bird brain. I also think something is wrong with that story, said Uraraka. As the eyes of everyone turned to her, she took a deep breath before speaking her thoughts. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Mineta did somehow get his hands on both the key card and the key ring. Well, we all saw that there are a lot of cabinets back there, and a lot of keys. He would have had to go through the keys one by one until he found the right one, looked inside, and then moved on to the next. It just seems too convenient that Mineta came in right after Sayatome left to get food, found all the keys he needed, got the right key each time, found the cameras, and got them out without anyone noticing, all before Sayatome came back. Also, given the size of the room and the number of keys he had, didn't anyone think it was odd that Sayatome knew exactly where the cameras were? Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, muttered Takage with a shake of her head. Dude was way too familiar with where they were located given that he claims he only brought them out once. So either he has a good memory or... Setsuna let her words hang as the few students who had doubted them put the pieces together. From there, the group split up. Uraraka, Ashido, Takage, Shinso, Kendo, and Kawakami would remain behind to watch the third-year support class to see if Sayatome made any moves. Meanwhile, the rest of the group would spread out around the campus to create a sort of net with a few even standing guard by the UA gate. There would even be a few looking for Mineta, just on the chance that he was involved. After all, there was a chance that Sayatome and Mineta had teamed up, but now that they were caught he was throwing the purple-haired pervert under the bus. About 5 minutes after they had left, the group watching the support class saw Sayatome leaving in a hurry. In fact, the older teen looked like he had been holding himself back for a while now, and now that he was unable to do so any longer, moving with reckless abandonment down the halls. He wasn't even looking behind him to see if he was being watched, just running as fast as he could. But what was strange was he wasn't moving towards any of the entrances or towards where the first years were located. Instead, he moved upwards within the building as if there was some sort of helicopter waiting for him. At the same time, Uraraka and the others moved as silently as possible as they followed their upperclassmen. Even though he wasn't looking behind them, they did their best to stay a good distance behind him. Just far enough so that they wouldn't be noticed, but not far enough to where they would lose him. Eventually Sayatome stopped in front of a fancy wooden door belonging to one of the business courses and, without bothering to ever look to see if there was anyone watching him, flung it open before darting inside. As the sound of doors being slammed shut echoed through the hallway, the first-year students quickly closed the distance while making sure that they made as little sound as possible. Now they were curious. A business course student did all this. Why was he as perverted as Mineta? And why now, in their third year when they had everything to lose? Almost as one, the group leaned closer to the door. Thankfully, they didn't need to press their ears against it as they could hear the shouting going on inside. "Come on, hurry up," shouted Sayatome, panic clear in his voice. "Either delete it all or else. If I'm going to let all this go to waste," came another male's voice. It wasn't the annoying tone like Minta's, but it did carry with it hints of Ida's authoritative tone, only deeper. "Not after all the footage we were able to gather. This stuff is gold. Do you have any idea how much this will be worth?" "Not if we get caught," yelled Sayatome, still in a panic. His voice seemed to move, most likely he was pacing within the classroom. "Oh God, I'm so screwed right now. I can't believe I let you talk me into this. I'm going to lose everything." "Everything? Not like you had much to begin with," snapped the other teen. "That's why you agreed to help me. Big rewards require big risks. Now, we can still salvage this situation. Just make sure you throw that first year under the bus and keep me out of all this. Do that, and I'll keep my end of the deal. Just let me finish moving these files to my thumb drive." Whoever was speaking got no further as Kendo had had enough, opening the door with enlarged hands that quickly ate into fists. Both older teens froze as their juniors rushed in, Sayatome looking like he was mid-step while the other, a white-haired boy with a comb-over haircut, looked like he had just placed a thumb drive into his front jacket pocket. Before the new teen was a laptop with several other brightly colored thumb drives all in a neat little row. "So," drawled Shinso, the first to speak, "is this part of your inventory?" "Oh my God, began Sayatome, but froze as he became trapped in Shinso's quirk. Now as he stood, there was an almost vacant expression on his face. "How about you sit down and stay there till the teachers come," ordered Shinso to the now brainwashed teen. As Sayatome was helpless but to do as he was ordered, the other teen grabbed something from beside him. A moment later, it was revealed to be a leather briefcase which he then flung at the heroes in training. More than likely he had been hoping that they would dodge it, for he was already on the move, ready to barrel on past them. But he never accounted for the skills of Kawakami's sisters as one of the heads reached out to bite down hard on the briefcase before tossing it aside. At the same time, Uraraka was on the move. Using the skills she had been learning over the last couple of days from both Midoriya and Kendo, Uraraka closed the distance between her and the fleeing teen before slamming her palm right onto his open chest. Due to her quirk activating as well as the force she used on the attack, the business senior was nearly sent flying up towards the ceiling if she hadn't managed to grab one of his flailing arms. Twisting her body, Uraraka then slammed the mastermind of the camera scheme down onto the ground with so much force that they all could hear a loud crack that made them all wince. However, the teen didn't seem too hurt as he was well enough to start screaming about how much legal trouble they were all in. Takagi ignored him as she dislocated her hands, which then moved behind the business teen, one holding him down by the neck while the other grabbed a wrist which pulled it behind his back. And while this was going on, Kendo called for the teachers. Thankfully, it didn't take them long as Kan showed up a few minutes later with Nezu perched on his red shoulder and Aizawa next to him. The three of them surveyed the situation, the business course student still screaming that they had no right and that he would take them all to court for this unlawful assault on his person. However, before any of the teachers could ask what happened, Uraraka noticed that Nezu was staring at something on the desk with narrowed eyes. Following his line of sight, the brown-haired girl noticed something there that they had overlooked. A device that, according to the principal, was a receiver used by the support course and teachers. From there, Nezu moved over to the laptop with the business course student screaming his head off about a breach of privacy. This when ignored as Nezu hopped off Vlad's shoulder before heading to the laptop. What he saw, Uraraka had no idea. All she knew was that the principal looked beyond angry as his tiny eyes darted from the screen to the thumb drives. "Check him to see if he has any more," hissed Nezu. "Also contact Midnight, Hound Dog, and Power Loader. We will need to do a complete sweep of the school grounds. That includes the teachers' locker rooms." The weight of the statement was not lost on any of the students, realizing just how far these two had gone. So, rather than asking questions, Takagi and Uraraka helped bring the mastermind of all of this back onto his feet by means of having the lizard tail splitter girl's hands holding said teen up by the wrists while his gravity was still removed. From there, the white-haired teen continued to thrash around, demanding that he be released as Vladkind patted him down while Aizawa kept a watchful on the boy from a distance. By the time they were done, they only found one of the portable storage devices on him. A lone plastic one that was broken into several pieces, no doubt due to how Uraraka handled him. However, that was not what was most pressing at the moment. For, as the white-haired teen finally began to quiet down, the teachers looked down on the device with horror as someone had written a label onto it. A single word that sent chills down their spines. "Blackmail. HRW what?" was all Izuku could say as he stared at the man across from him, a cold sweat appearing on the teen's brow while still processing what he had heard. Besides him, he heard the clang of silverware. Slightly shifting his attention, the teen saw Pony looking as pale as he himself felt with her eyes looking on in horror. Quickly, Izuku looked back at Blackhound hoping that he would break out into a smile and tell them it was a joke. After all, they couldn't be serious. Sure, the way they painted the picture of what would happen when All Might retired was grim, but to go back to project quirk rebirth. Were they out of their minds? Out of 20 children, only one survived. Him. After a moment or two of silence, Izuku managed to find his voice once more. "Why you can't?" he stated, nearly rising from his seat as he spoke. "I mean, does President Burke even know what happened back then?" Oh yes, he does, said Blackhound with a strange amount of calmness. He even called me to the Oval Office to speak with me directly on the matter. He is also. Then why didn't you convince him it wasn't worth it? Shouted Pony as she stood, knocking over her glass as she did. Thankfully, there was only ice which rolled across the table. But Blackhound wasn't paying that any mind as he began gesturing with his hands for Pony to calm down. Something that she ignored, placing a hand over her heart. How could you? Do people's lives really mean so little to you? This is monstrous. This is insane. This Tsunotori, began Blackhound, raising his voice above that of Pony's while his face showed a rare spark of anger. Izuku was about to shout back when he noticed that Carol was also glaring at them. Her face practically screamed, "How dare you talk about my father like that?" Glancing over at Pony, the teen saw that his girlfriend also noticed this. Slowly, the two of them sank back into their seats. As for Blackhound, one of his scarred hands reached up to rub his forehead before a deep sigh escaped him. Bit by bit, the tension in the room began to lessen, though not completely vanishing altogether. "Pony, Izuku," Blackhound said at last, his face calmer and now more relaxed. "I apologize. I should have asked that you remain calm until I finished explaining everything. Yes, that might have been better given the history the two of you share with the project. And now I've gone and ruined what was supposed to be a lovely dinner between friends." Mr. Blackhound, began Izuku, his mouth going slightly dry. He then took a deep breath before speaking. "Sorry, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to hear everything." "Thank you," replied Blackhound with a nod, placing his scarred hands on top of each other. "Yes, when I spoke to President Burke, he was already familiar with what happened at the project. Not really surprising as it had been part of a government contract. I'm sure before I ever stepped into that office he had been debriefed on the whole situation by a number of advisors. Though when I did get there, he gave me the impression that this was the last thing he wanted to attach his name to. Whether it was because he found the deaths gruesome or fearing what would happen to his poll numbers should the deaths become far too large to cover up. Maybe even both. Still, he was willing to speak with me as he was with many other companies. Now, even though the project was officially shut down, that didn't mean that we just threw everything away. No, that would have meant that those who didn't make it died for nothing. Since that day, I have spent millions of my company's budget each year trying to figure out how you, Izuku, were the only survivor. And, last year, we were able to confirm with 98% certainty that it was because you were originally quirkless." Izuku blinked at that. "I don't understand," he muttered. "How does being quirkless make it so I would survive?" Blackhound didn't answer right away. Instead, he held up his glass of wine, gazing up at the red liquid. "Did you know that the inspiration for this project came from a Japanese bujaman?" he asked, his tone sounding far off. "I remember hearing whispers about the man in the shady apartment I grew up in. Most of the drug dealers, pimps, and worse would talk about him. About a man from the dawn of quirks who had the power to steal another person's quirk, collecting them for himself but also able to bestow them onto others. More than once, I heard them wondering if the man would pay for a good quirk. This mostly came from the pimps, no doubt fooling themselves into thinking they could make more money from the girls who were past their prime, as they put it." As Blackhound said this last part, a look of utter disgust and revulsion swept over his face before drinking half the contents of his glass, as if what he had said had left a foul taste in his mouth, one he hoped he could wash away. "I bring this up because, while the idea was based on these stories, quirks are not like a piece of computer hardware," said Blackhound, letting down his glass as he spoke. His demeanor was once more closer to that of a businessman, one that was explaining a product to potential investors. "Everyone's bodies are built around their quirk so that they can handle it. For example, if a person has a fire quirk, then their skin needs to be able to withstand that heat to keep it from burning up, at least to some degree. So, if we were to give a quirk to a person who didn't have this built-in resistance, there would be serious drawbacks to using said quirk. This was something that my team understood from the beginning and worked to address. Our solution was to come up with something akin to a retrovirus, rewriting the target's DNA in such a way that would not only genetically transplant the revived quirk into the target but also altering their body so that they could handle it just as well as the original. What's more, we added in several drugs that could accelerate the process. We also choose the time when our subject would get this process with the greatest of care, at a time when their bodies were still growing and would have a greater chance to adapt to these sudden changes. The problem is that all of the children that day already had quirks. Rather than having their new changes to the body blend in with the original, they instead began to clash in unexpected ways that we could not have foreseen. Everyone but you, Izuku, you, who were the lone blank slate, were able to accept the changes without any issue." At some point, Izuku found himself placing a hand on his chest. For so long, he had wondered what had made him so fortunate to survive that day. Had he just been the lucky one? That by some miracle he had been spared, a 1 in 100 chance of survival. But now, hearing that it was the thing that he had lacked that saved his life gave him conflicting emotions that he didn't properly know how to describe. There was closure and relief, but also, Izuku shook his head at this before turning his attention back to Blackhound. "Are you sure about that?" he asked. "I mean, I get it. Me being the only quirkless person there is probably the most notable factor. But it couldn't be that simple, could it?" Blackhound chuckled a little at that. "Izuku, my dear boy, we've been studying what went wrong for years in order to come to this conclusion. Yes, the fact that you were the only quirkless child there did not go unnoticed. So much so that it was the first thing that my team brought up when I asked how it was that you were able to succeed. However, we wanted to be very, very careful with this. We wished to rule out every single possibility. We took the remaining genetic samples of the children we lost, taken prior to their untimely demise, and repeated the process on a much smaller scale. The results were different, though no less deadly. We also tried slowing the process down, giving the samples more time to adjust. At that, Blackhound paused to take a breath. If those had been real people, they would have lasted longer, as well as suffered far longer than anyone should. Blackhound then gestured towards Izuku. At the same time, we were experimenting on your original quirkless samples as well as using the new ones we gathered during your visits to our headquarters. With those original samples, we wanted to see if it was the quirk or the body modifications that you received that saved your life. Let's just say that, no matter what quirk you would have been given, you would still be here enjoying this wonderful steak dinner. As for the samples we received later on, those did not do well at all. It seems like nobody shall ever have more than one quirk. Does that mean you're giving up trying? Asked Pony, very curious. Well, there are a few people still working for me that wish to keep trying, replied Blackhound, frowning slightly, though both teens could tell it wasn't directed at Pony. The most ethically sound idea that has appeared on my desk suggests that we forego the additional body modification. That just giving a person a quirk is simply enough. However, I firmly disagree with this approach, as having a quirk that would damage the user would defeat the overall purpose. After that, I have one scientist that believes that we need to alter the human body more in order so that they will be able to handle the changes. Sadly for him, I do not wish for the human race to become eldritch horrors. Another believes that we simply didn't start young enough, that the process should begin while the infants are in the womb. There we can control the very development of their bodies as well as the quirks they get. I firmly told him no, so quirk rebirth is going to focus solely on those without a quirk, asked Izuku as he leaned forwards in his seat. This would mean that nobody would ever have to go through what Izuku did, that even a child born quirkless could grow up like any other person in this superpowered society and dream about being a hero. Sure, they might get teased or bullied for not having a natural quirk, but things like that would always exist. Blackhound's eyes relaxed while a smile appeared on his face. That is correct, he said warmly. To be honest, I'm happy that quirk rebirth is being used for its original purpose instead of allowing rich, entitled people to give their children multiple quirks. It's why I approved your father's request to have you placed in the program. I'm glad it worked out. Now, no child will ever have to go through the same thing you or I did. At that, Izuku felt a bit of unease in his gut as his eyes darted towards the crooked hands and nose of the man before him before briefly glancing over at Carol. Two people who he knew were quirkless. For Blackhound, he had been born in a time when it wasn't so uncommon for someone to give birth to a child without a quirk, though they were still growing up in the minority. What had made it harder was that he grew up in a very poor neighborhood while living in a country that had one of the most lax quirk laws in the world, due in part to an interpretation of the Second Amendment. Because of that, Blackhound had been the victim of bullies and thugs to the point where he had been taken by an ambulance more times than he could count. Each scar and broken bone were reminders of the nightmare that he had lived through before clawing his way out of hell. As for Carol, even though her mother had a quirk, she had inherited her father's condition, something that the former Mrs. Blackhound never forgave him for before walking out of their lives. Still, the man had pressed forward, ensuring that his daughter never went through anything as harmful as what he went through. I think you had it worse than I ever did, mumbled Izuku. No, but you were on the track, said Blackhound, his voice filled with empathy and understanding. Your father told me, shortly after you finished the process, about what happened at the playground. How you looked in the video call he had with you afterwards. Those kids were your friends, once upon a time. Am I right? I thought they were, said Izuku slowly, averting his eyes. Though I can barely remember their names or what they look like, I still remember some bits of it. The pain, the taste of blood in my mouth, the laughter as my ears rang. Then, the green-haired boy's eyes widened as he looked back Blackhound, his arms outstretched and waving around wildly. Not that what I went through was worse than anything you did. But that's where it starts, replied Blackhound with a sigh. One of my first scars happened when I made a blood pact with my best friend. We were maybe 3 and used an old rusty can lid to cut our palms. First time I was ever rushed to the hospital too. The man paused as he gave a light, humorless chuckle. But that bond didn't last long. He got a quirk that allowed him to stretch his arms and wrap them around stuff. We all thought it was pretty cool. Then, he seemed to change. Started with pulling parks and some other little things. Simple thing that most children get into when they first get their quirks. The man then paused as he looked down at the table, his eyes half-lidded as he did. I wish things had stayed like that. He began to use his quick to steal from the local stores. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised by this, given the type of place we were growing up and the fact that his parents were not the best. From there, all it took was me simply saying that it wasn't a good idea to keep stealing for him to become the reason for my second trip to the hospital ever. As he said this last part, a hand reached upwards so that he could lightly touch his neck with his fingers. At the same time, Carol placed a hand on her father's shoulder. After a moment or two of silence, Blackhound took a deep breath before looking at Izuku again and continuing. Like you, that feeling has stuck with me ever since. The feeling of his arm wrapping around his neck. the look in his eyes as my vision began to fade, the fear that at any moment that would be my last breath. At the very least, I remember that there were a few kids around willing to stand up to him. Izuku, that was one thing you didn't have. But, if all goes according to plan, we can close the door on this issue. Izuku nodded before a frown appeared on his face, a hand going to his chin as he began to think aloud. A sight that brought an amused smile on Blackhound's face. While I'm glad that this is happening, I just have to wonder if there will be enough quirkless for this to be effective enough. At least, to the point that the US wants. Given the limited amount of people in the US around the same age I was when I got my quirk makes me wonder if that will really make a difference. That along with the slowly decreasing number of people being born quirkless, it stands to reason that there may come a time when the number of quirkless people becomes less than 1%. Also, will people be able to afford this? Those were some of the things me and President Burke discussed, said Blackhound. Starting with the money issue, the president is working on a system that would allow parents to get their children a quirk free of charge. In addition, the government will provide funding to allow those children to attend some of the top hero schools in the country. However, the condition is that said child must agree to serve as a hero for a minimum of 10 years. With that, began Pony, growing pale. That seems too cruel. I mean, I always wanted to be a hero just like my mother. Just like every other kid. But, then we grew up. I have a friend back home that is now learning to be a quirk dancer and another one that wants to become a physiologist. What happens to people like that who discover a different interest or want to pursue something else? And what about people who become afraid? You know, my mom didn't come back unharmed from every patrol. There were times when we thought she might not make it. What happens to those children when they realize this fact and that they are living in the country with the highest rate of villain attacks as well as hero death in the world? And what happens when they die or get injured so badly that they are unable to continue being a hero? As Pony spoke about her mother, Izuku's hand instinctively reached out to take Pony's. He recalled the times when he had gotten the bad news, either by text or email, that something had happened to her mother. Only once did the Midoriya family hear from the news first that the pro-hero unicorn was in critical condition. Each time the family received this news, the topic of dropping everything to travel back to the US was discussed in order to help out. Like how Inko was worried that the family might not be taking care of themselves due to worry, wanting to go over to cook their meals while making sure they got enough rest. Asashi wanted to be there as well, wanting to offer up his own skills to make sure all their appliances and equipment was taken care of with his own touch. Though that idea was usually shot down by Izuku and his mother, as they both knew the man was more likely to cause anything he tried to fix to explode. As for Izuku, he just wanted to be that shoulder for Pony to cry on. Thankfully, for one reason or another, the travel was not needed. Those are all very real concerns, said Blackhound with a nod. One that both myself and the president are in the process of addressing. Currently, Burke is working with Congress to add an escape clause allowing the person in question to terminate this promise. However, there will need to be a penalty of some kind, and since we will be unable to remove the quirk, it's more than likely that there shall be a fine. No doubt covering the costs for the process as well as a few other things like any heroic schooling with some added interest. The same will happen if they are removed from the school for any reason or if they gain a criminal record. As for being injured or killed, that is sadly something that Burke has to speak with the Department of Heroism. He is hopeful that they will waive the fees as long as it happened while they were on duty. If not, then a committee will be formed to decide how much they are to pay back with interest, or have the debt transferred to the next of kin should they pass. At that, Pony frowned but didn't say anything. No doubt she was conflicted by what she was hearing. The whole thing seemed to be taking advantage of people in a desperate situation. Such massive fines would no doubt put additional pressure onto these children so that they would be more likely to stay with the program. Then, they would feel forced to fight for something that they might no longer wish to do, or to do it out of obligation. But with that said, nothing in this world is free, and perhaps there would be a payment system put into place to make things easier on the families. Or maybe Izuku was being a bit too optimistic. As for the number of quirkless, we will be trying to attract quirkless people from around the world, continued Blackhound before a scowl appeared on his face. We are still recovering from President Timble's American Heroes First Act, forbidding non-native-born citizens from entering hero schools, fining companies who hired immigrant support personnel, cutting the amount of pay foreign heroes receive from their work by 90%, and adding in additional fines. I will never understand what that buffoon and the purist party were thinking. A low growl then escaped Blackhound's throat as his features darkened. Well, they got what they wanted. Almost the very next day, foreign heroes who had set up shop in the US closed their agencies before moving out of the country, while many support companies had to let go of their employees. And what was the result? Entire communities losing the only heroes in their area, with the insurance in those areas going up while also disrupting the local economy. Crime rates in those areas shot up, some becoming compared to a war zone. And when things got so bad that governors were calling for military assistance to deal with the problem, what did Timble do? Pretend there wasn't a problem even as entire cities were burning so much that they could be seen from orbit. He even forbade All Might from setting foot in the country. Daddy, deep breaths, said Carol quickly as she noticed her father's face turning red from anger. An anger that was shared, though not quite as intense, by both Izuku and Pony. All of this had ended back when the two were one, but that did not mean that they had not been taught about the events in school. Specifically, America's Purist Party. In simplest terms, they were an extremist political party that had gained power due to their stance on immigration. Namely, there shouldn't be any and that their country belonged only to natural-born citizens. One of the targets of their ire were foreign heroes who had set up agencies in their country, claiming that they were diluting American heroes and bringing with them more crime. Thankfully, both their behavior and policies proved to be so toxic that most of them were removed from the House and Senate after 2 years with President Timble not receiving a second term. However, the party was still alive and still held some firm believers even to this day. It was because of this that many heroes around the world were nervous about setting up shop in America out of fear that the Purist Party would regain power. Thankfully, Blackhound managed to regain his composure, though some of the anger he held was still there in his face. It is our hope that we can use Quirk Rebirth to attract potential new heroes. President Burke is proposing that we give full citizenship to any family whose quirkless child signs up as an additional incentive. Saying this seemed to calm the man down some more as Blackhound began to relax a bit in his seat. You are correct when you bring up the slowly decreasing population of the quirkless. While there is nothing we can do about that, we have been hard at work expanding the age range of people who can receive the procedure. Currently, we've done over 1,000 simulations and we believe that it can work along with additional drugs as well as a few additional treatments. All that is left is to start live tests on quirkless people ages 4 to 20, which will include me, added Carol with a grin. Wait, really? Said Pony with a gasp. Carol nodded her head as she picked up a spoon which she then pointed it at her father. Believe me, it took forever to convince Daddy about letting me do this. But I managed to win him over by saying that if he didn't feel confident enough to let his daughter in on this procedure, then he might as well not try it at all. So you know what quirk are you getting? Asked Izuku, leaning forward as he was more than a little curious. A wide grin appeared on Carol's face as she pulled out her phone. Yep, this time around we were given a list of quirks we could choose from. For me, it was a no-brainer. The quirk is called lycanthrope. Just then, the woman seemed to have found what she was looking for on her phone. As Carol held the device proudly in front of her, both Izuku and Pony leaned forward to see what it was. On the screen were two images side by side. The right side showed a man dressed only in his boxers with long chestnut brown hair that had dog ears sticking out of his head and a matching tail on his rear that went down to his ankles. The left side showed what looked like a brown wolf man, his finger now sporting claws and a muzzle instead of a normal human mouth. This was a no-brainer for me, explained Carol as she pulled the phone back. I mean, my name is Blackhound, so I might as well have a dog-themed quirk. Plus, it's pretty cool. I can shift between being normal me plus cute doggy ears and a full-on wolf woman whose strength increases based on the phase of the moon. Not too shabby. So does this mean you're also going to try your hands in heroics? Asked Pony. To that, Carol shook her head. Nope, she said simply as she closed her eyes while raising both hands in the air briefly. At least, not on the front line like you guys want to. The work Daddy's company is doing is just as important as taking down the bad guys. Besides, do you have any idea how much work I would have to do in order to qualify to become a hero in the US? I would have to first get my body into shape before I could step foot in one of our hero schools. A high school level hero school. Honestly, there is another reason I'm picking this quirk. Out of everything on that list, it's not even close to being the most impressive or powerful. I just want a quirk so that I can be normal, you know. None of the people we are using for these tests will be forced into heroics if they don't want to, added Mr. Blackhound. Right now we are just looking to confirm if we can give quirks to them as well as seeing if there will be any negative side effects. But should they want to, my company will do everything in its power to make it so. Okay, said Izuku slowly as he processed all of this. But, I still don't understand why you're telling me all this. Well, besides the fact that I was involved in the process the first time. Ah yes, replied Blackhound. The man then took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before speaking. Izuku, my boy, have you ever wondered why you were allowed to leave the States? You know, after that tragic day. Izuku frowned as he looked down at his plate. To be honest, he had wondered that more than once. These thoughts mainly occurred when he was traveling to and from the States for his checkups. After all, this was a one-of-a-kind process, so it would have made more sense just to keep him close. And with the reach someone like Mr. Blackhound had, he could have easily gotten the family their American status. Heck, he could have forged new identities for the entire family as well as getting them a new house with the money he found between his couch cushions. And a nice house at that. Or, as darker thoughts suggested, he could have had his parents forcibly sign him over to the man's custody and then lock him up in a small testing room for the rest of his life. Both those thoughts normally only lasted until he left the plane, either spotting his blonde-haired friend again or seeing the signs that they were back in Japan. I have, said Izuku eventually. I thought as much, said Blackhound with a light nod of his head. Well, some high-ranking people within my company had certain beliefs on how we should be handling your future that I personally didn't agree with. We had no idea if the procedure was permanent or not, so the desire to have plenty of samples was very strong. But, as you well know, that didn't happen. partly because I held no desire to rip you from your home. Not after so many other children had lost their lives far from their own homes and families. The other part was that I was hoping we could salvage Project Quirk Rebirth. If we ever got this to work, it would naturally come out sooner or later. When that happened, I was as certain back then as I am now that we would be asked a simple question: can someone who has undergone this procedure live a normal life? And you, Izuku Midoriya, are the living proof of that. So all that is left is for the whole world to hear. Which is why I would like you to make this announcement during the sports festival. Izuku's thoughts grinded to a halt as he stared at the face of Black Hound, the man smiling at him while clasping his hands together in a very pleasant manner. However, this did little to reassure Izuku as he felt his world spinning all around him. Had he heard right? The secretive bone of my sword was one that Izuku Midoriya had guarded dearly, with only a few people aware of how he had gotten it. As well as one who had suspected something was wrong with it. However, Izuku had not thought of that person for so long that the name and face of the individual had long since been forgotten. The reason he had kept this secret was not just because the company had told him to, which he completely understood why, but also because he was afraid. Afraid of how the world would react, thinking that he was a liar and a faker that had snuck his way into the world of heroes. That's a lot to take in, the teen finally said honestly. As he spoke, Izuku began to imagine what that scene would be like. Would he be giving the opening speech at the sport festival, casually mentioning that he got his quirk via a science experiment? Or would he only mention it if he placed? Already he could see various negative outcomes. The medal being taken away, people calling him a cheater since his quirk wasn't natural. More and more angry shouts began to fill his head, calling him a freak as well as other such things that made his skin grow cold. Izuku, a person willing to take on a zero-pointer without a second thought, was terrified of a crowd and what they would think of him. Maybe it was because the largest crowd he had ever spoken to was a class and not a stadium full of pro heroes and regular people that would be allowed to shout at him and throw things at him, and it would be viewed all over the world. And he wouldn't be focusing on defeating a villain to distract him from these facts. Oh, and he doubted he could fight the crowd without getting into trouble, making him effectively helpless. Yes, I am aware, replied the man with a nod. Now, I can see that you're freaking out a little and I understand. I know I'm asking a lot. I don't, was all the bone-using teen could say, feeling sweat forming all over his body. His hands began to tremble for a moment but stopped when he felt ponies on top of his own. With heavy breaths he looked up, seeing that she was looking back at him with an expression that seemed to say, I'm here with you right now. Don't worry. Seeing that did help calm the young man down as he turned to look at the CEO across from him. Said man's smile was gone, replaced with a look of concern with his phone in hand. Izuku, are you okay to continue? He asked. If not, we can end this conversation right now and I can arrange to have you taken back to your dorm. And no, I'm fine, stammered Izuku. Like I said, it's a lot to take in. I mean, I kind of get it. The sport festival is the most watched event in the world. Not to mention some of the biggest heroes and heads of support companies will be there in person. Yes, said Black Hound as he set his phone down. Now, I'm not asking you to make this announcement before the crowd as part of the opening speeches or anything like that. Knowing you, you've no doubt watched the events that happen at the end of each day of the sports festival. Specifically the live interviews that are given to the top 3 participants. Black Hound paused, watching Izuku, who gave a slow nod as he did begin to calm down. The interviews he was talking about were more like press conferences held in a large room with almost 100 reporters from all over the world. Each day of the festival, the top-placing students of that year would be asked question after question, getting their first real taste of what it meant to be a pro in this situation. Sitting with them would be their homeroom teacher and any family that happened to make it there that day, as well as any friends in attendance as well. While it was still intimidating, it was leagues better than doing it before a crowd. Of course, you won't be alone, continued Black Hound. If you decide to go along with this, I am planning on being there for the sports festival along with Carol so that we can help the press better understand by answering any questions that you yourself are unable to answer. Naturally, after this, reporters from all over the world will do some digging. That is part of their job after all. They will look into every record of you that is on file, checking to see if there is anything they can use. They will talk about everyone you have ever met, classmates, teachers, doctors, the bus driver, the people who work at your favorite restaurant. They will look into anyone they can, searching for proof that something is wrong. To find something to drum up negative press for the sake of ratings. And what will they find? Your life, my boy. The best proof that anyone can give that not only is this procedure safe, but that you can live a healthy, normal life without anyone being any wiser. I do not doubt there will be conspiracy theorists out there who will claim that I have pulled all the strings, but as long as the major news networks only report the truth, it should die down with time. And that truth will be heard all over the world. That parents will no longer have to live in fear that, as minor as it is nowadays, that their children will be born quirkless. Black Hound then stood up, reaching out a hand towards Izuku. Izuku, I know you have your own reasons for doing well in the sports festival. But, should you succeed and make it to one of the pedestals, would you loudly declare to the world that you are here to mark the end of the age of quirklessness?